Chapter 520. The crisp and hurried sound of horse hooves rang out on the mountain path. The soldiers on the watchtower picked up their bows and arrows and vigilantly looked into the distance. There were tall watchtowers built at the four corners of the village. They had a wide field of vision and could see everything in their surroundings. From the tall watchtower, they could see a brown horse galloping on the mountain path like an arrow. The person on the horse shook the whip in the air and then lashed it on the horse's buttocks in a very rhythmic manner. With each lash of the whip, the horse's speed increased. "It's the second steward!" A sharp-eyed soldier was the first to shout, "Open the gate! The second steward has returned." The wooden gate, with a spear-like fence on the top half of the gate, opened. The middle-aged man on the horse whipped the horse again and charged into the village. This was Kaori's village. Kaori ruled over a large area of land and countless people. However, his village and people were scattered in all kinds of places, such as river valleys, mountains, and plains. The village that the Kaori family's chieftains lived in was only slightly larger than the other villages. Limited by the production of the land, it was impossible to gather too many people here. At this time, Kaori had just returned from inspecting his village and fields. On his land, the chieftains were revered by his people like gods. No one dared to offend the chieftain's authority. However, the prerequisite was that the chieftain had to let everyone have food to eat. If the chieftain didn't let his people have enough to eat, it would bring him great danger. The chieftain didn't just own the land and gave it to his people to farm. He had to manage the spring plowing and autumn harvesting. A long time ago, there was once a chieftain who didn't choose the best seeds to distribute to his people during the spring plowing. As a result, the crops didn't grow well. When pests appeared in the summer, he didn't take any effective measures to eliminate them. As a result, there was no harvest in the autumn. Another chieftain who had a grudge against him took the opportunity to lead his troops to attack him. The chieftains on this piece of land, and even the headmen under the same chieftain, would often have conflicts and fights. However, they all purposely controlled the scale of the fights. Once it got out of hand, even if they didn't want to stop, the other chieftains and headmen would interfere. But this time, before the other chieftains and headmen could interfere, the chieftain who sent the troops successfully attacked the enemy's stronghold and killed his entire family. Because when his troops arrived, the other chieftains' commoners knelt down and surrendered. No one resisted, and no one went to protect their chieftain. In the end, the chieftains who hurriedly interfered could only choose a chieftain from the immediate family of the slain chieftain to inherit his position. This incident was taken as a lesson by all the chieftains. They would talk about it again and again to their chosen successor, telling him the importance of land, food, and people. Kaori had also grown up listening to this story. He gave people the impression that he was a crude and barbaric old man. But in his village, he was a leader and an elder who loved his people and cared for everything they did. The Bai man's customs were similar to the Han people. They mainly farmed, raised silkworms, weaved cloth, and fished. They also had a small amount of livestock. The most important thing for them every year was the arrangements for spring plowing. But the control of drought and pests in the summer was also very important. This year, there was plenty of rain, so there was no need to worry about drought. What Kaori was most concerned about was the pests. He had just returned from the fields. The crops planted by his people were growing very well this year. He had drilled into the fields to take a closer look. The effects of the pests were minimal. When Kaori rode back to his stronghold, he still had a satisfied smile on his face. Along the way, his clansmen would respectfully stop in their tracks and bow to him. Kaori sat on his horse and straightened his back. He solemnly nodded to his people to return the greeting. At this time, a fast horse galloped over. Kaori glanced at the person and jokingly scolded. "It really is Long Fei. This kid likes to be rash." The man riding the horse into the stronghold also saw him. The horse quickly galloped toward him. When there was still 6 or 7 zhang between them, the man hurriedly pulled on the reins. The The fine horse neighed and reared. When its front feet touched the ground again, the man had already run in front of Fumiaki. He bowed deeply and took out an invitation from his bosom. He said to Kaori, "Chieftain Darren, the imperial envoy sent by the court has invited Chieftain Darren to Yaozhou City to discuss the capture of the traitors. Because the banquet is set for tomorrow, your servant was worried that I would miss the banquet, so I immediately rushed back." When Kaori heard that Huang Jingrong had summoned him, his face immediately darkened. The second steward, Long Fei, respectfully presented the invitation. Kaori grabbed the letter in his hand and looked at Long Fei, saying, "I heard that during the banquet, all the chieftains were very unhappy." Long Fei respectfully said, "Yes, that imperial envoy probably thinks of himself as the emperor of the Central Plains, and all of our chieftains and chieftains are his slaves. He is very rude, and all of the chieftains are very angry at his rude actions." Kaori increased his tone and said in a loud and rough voice, "What imperial envoy? He is just a greedy hyena, a savage jackal. In his eyes there is only gold, women, and power. Traitors plotting a rebellion? Those pitiful traitors plotting a rebellion? What a great joke! Only the empress, who sat in a palace made of gold and acted like a tyrant, who listened to the flattery of a few close servants, who never personally inspected her people, and who never went to see the harvest of her land, would believe such stupid words. Long Fei, if I remember correctly, your son's wife is a traitor woman, right?" Long Fei beamed and said, "Yes. My Darren, she is really a good woman. She is beautiful, diligent, and especially filial to the elderly. The rarest thing is that she is literate like you, chieftain. That son of mine is really lucky. She is already pregnant, and I will be holding my grandson soon." Kaori laughed loudly and said, "Then tell me, will she plot a rebellion? Should she be dragged to be beheaded?" Long Fei was furious, and his eyes turned red. "How could such a docile and good woman rebel? She is still pregnant with my, Long Fei's, grandson. If any damned Han official dares to drag her to be beheaded, Long Fei will fight him to the death." Kaori laughed loudly and did not even open the invitation. He directly tore it into pieces and threw it into the air. Then he turned his horse and galloped towards the rock house he lived in. Yun Xian hurriedly found Wen Hao and said in a low voice, "Kaori is not willing to come." Wen Hao asked nervously, "Could it be that he discovered something?" Yun Xian said angrily, "Discover my ass. I have already asked around. He was tricked by this Huang Jingrong in Feng Province and was only let go after being blackmailed. It would be strange if he was willing to come again." Wen Hao paced around the room nervously and asked again, "Is that Meng Zhizhu willing to come?" Yun Xian said, "It's not like you don't know that Meng Zhizhu has always liked to compete with Kaori. If Kaori doesn't come, wouldn't he be lowering his own status if he came?" Wen Hao punched his palm and was extremely vexed. Yun Xian comforted him. "You don't have to worry too much about it. I already said that this method is useless. Even if we capture their chieftain, their tribe will not use the surrender of the entire tribe in exchange for the chieftain's freedom. When the time comes, they will raise up a successor and use the banner of revenge for the chieftain. It will not be easy for us to clean up the mess." Wen Hao gritted his teeth and said, "Then there is no other way. We can only use force." Yun Xian said cheerfully, "That's right. This is the only method we can use. Then shall we make our move tomorrow?" Wen Hao nodded his head heavily and reminded, "Don't forget to first ask Imperial Censor Huang for a warrant." Yun Xian smiled knowingly and said, "Don't worry, I know." In the afternoon of the second day, the farmers were hard at work in the terraced fields on the hillside. The weather was still hot, and the treetops were drooping weakly. Suddenly, the sound of horse hooves could be heard in the distance. The farmers who were working in the fields looked into the distance and saw a few horses galloping in their direction. On the left, right, and behind the horses there was a large group of soldiers holding spears and long blades. The farmers thought that it was a chieftain who had come to inspect their territory and quickly returned to their fields. They did not dare to raise their heads and were about to kneel down and kowtow to their master when the spears and blades wielding soldiers pounced on them like wolves and tigers. The ground was covered in blood and screams. The farmers were shocked to find that these masters were not the masters of their territory. Some of them quickly fled to the fields, mountains, and valleys. Some of them, because they still had wives and children to protect, clenched their teeth and pulled out their blades to fight for their lives. The people of this area were tough and intrepid. Whether it was to defend against possible bandits or wild beasts that suddenly appeared in the forest, a blade was an essential weapon. But the farmers were outnumbered. Soon, corpses were left on the ground, and the others had all escaped. The farmers who had escaped back to the village had just told the chief what had happened in the fields. The chief ordered people to blow the horn and gather the young and strong people in the village to help. But those people had already rushed to the village with a murderous look. The village had been looted. Food, cattle, sheep, and everything of value had been forcibly taken away by the bandits and soldiers. Some of the bandits even carried some young and beautiful girls on their shoulders. Indescribably sorrowful and angry people cried on the ground, cursing and crying as they watched the bandits come and go in a hurry. Above the burning houses, sparks danced in the sky. This village belonged to the chieftain of the smoked period. It was said that this village sheltered the vagrants. After Yang Fan rushed to the city of Yaozhou, he spent 2 days figuring out the power structure of Yaozhou and some of the things that had happened after Huang Jingrong had arrived. However, Yang Fan still hadn't thought of a particularly appropriate way to discreetly incite a greater conflict between the Yaozhou tribe and Huang Jingrong, incite them to stir up trouble and also control the situation within a manageable range. At this time, Huang Jingrong had already impatiently launched an attack on the smoked period chieftain. Yang Fan had never thought that Huang Jingrong would actually be so cooperative. Before he had done anything, Huang Jingrong had already done everything. Moreover, she had done it better and more efficiently than him. Chapter 521. Similar conflicts continued to occur in the stronghold of Chieftain Xuanqi and Chieftain Jiju, who had suffered an unexpected calamity. The stronghold chiefs, who had been robbed, led the people who had lost their homes to seek refuge with their chieftains and cried out their grievances to the chieftain. After Xuanqi heard the news, his old face turned red with anger. He kicked the table so hard that it hit the opposite wall. How dare they, Wenhao and Yunxian, those 2 bastards, dare to openly send people to invade my territory and have designs on me? His eldest son, Xuanqi Wuba, angrily said, I rushed over to negotiate with our people. They said that the stronghold that was attacked was harboring traitors, and that the imperial envoy had already obtained evidence. Helping the traitors is equivalent to rebelling and should be punished severely. The 2 chieftains were also forced by the imperial envoy and had no choice but to do this. They are ting. Xuanqi sneered. You can't hide from the next door even if you hide from the heavens and the earth. Do they think this old man is blind and can't see what they are planning and what they want to do? Xuanqi paced back and forth in the house. His sons, the chieftain, the housekeeper, and the chief of the stronghold stood inside and outside the house. They did not say a word as they waited for the chieftain's decision. Xuanqi suddenly stopped and loudly said, A treacherous neighbor is even more terrifying than a vicious enemy. The butcher's knife has already been extended to our chieftain. What else can we do other than counterattack? Xuanqi coldly swept his gaze over the people who were holding their breaths in front of him and shouted in an even louder voice, Gather the troops and immediately counterattack! On the hillside, a dozen or so young women and girls were picking mulberry leaves. The sweet mountain song traveled to the fields at the foot of the mountain. An old man straightened his back in the fields and wiped the sweat off his forehead. As he listened to the song coming from the hillside, A serene smile appeared on his wrinkled face. Suddenly, a few horses galloped over from afar. The old man covered his eyes with his hand and looked into the distance. When he saw who it was, he couldn't help but cry out. He quickly covered his mouth and shouted to the people in the field, "The housekeeper is here! Our housekeeper is here!" Then he quickly picked up his hoe and ran to the field. The people ran out from the mountains and fields and knelt at the foot of the mountain. The steward pulled on the reins of his horse and said loudly to the people kneeling in front of him, "Go back and tell your chief that Chieftain has decided to declare war on Chieftain Wenhao and Chieftain Yunxian. Tell all the men in your stronghold above the age of 14 and below the age of 55 to prepare their own weapons and rations. They are to arrive at Chieftain Stronghold before sunset tomorrow to await further orders." Yes, we will obey the chieftain's orders. The old farmer took the orders for the rest, and the steward spurred his horse and led his attendants to the next stockade. The farmers got up from the ground, and the old farmer gave a few words of advice. A half-grown child ran wildly into the stockade. Similar scenes were staged in every stronghold. The warriors of the white barbarians gathered in the stronghold from all directions. Originally, there were only about 2,000 residents in the stronghold, but by the evening of the second day, there were already 30,000 warriors gathered. There were even more people coming from all directions with torches in their hands. Some were riding horses, some were walking. Ever since Chieftain Yunxuan's Blue Water Stockade had sent troops to attack Chieftain Yunxuan's stockade, they had increased their security. During the day, they had to send people to keep watch from afar while doing farm work, and at night, they had to increase the number of people patrolling the stockade by several times. At midnight, all sorts of strange sounds suddenly came from the dark forest. The birds flew up in fright, the wild beasts ran through the forest, and the strong men guarding the stockade raised their bows and arrows, looking around in fear. In the dark night, the mournful sound of the swona, the desolate sound of a bugle horn, and the hurried sound of a clapper suddenly rang out. One torch lit up, and then countless torches. The countless torches were like countless stars in the night sky suddenly falling into the mortal world. An entire stockade was surrounded by a sea of stars. The bamboo bough in the hands of the stockade chief fell to the ground with a clatter. He was a brave warrior, and he had not been afraid even when he faced a pie bear alone. At this moment, it was not because he was afraid of death, but because he was in despair. He could not imagine how the stockade could be defended against so many enemies. Similar counterattacks were taking place in each of the strongholds. The foreign merchants, with a keen sense of smell, had already realized that the war this time seemed to be unusual. Although the flames of war had not spread to Yaozhou City, they had already packed up all of their assets in advance and began to flee the city. No one noticed that the most loyal stewards of Chieftain Wenhao and Chieftain Yunxian had also brought along some of their trusted subordinates to load the mountains of gold, silver, and jewelry that had been accumulated by the two great families over thousands of years onto yak carts. They were sandwiched between the merchant carts as they left Yao State City. Even though the Black Man tribe had also been attacked, their losses were not as great as the White Man tribe. This was because the Black Man tribe was mainly nomadic. Their tribe was spread out far from the large city of Dafu, and their people were scattered. Therefore, the warriors of Yunxian and Wenhao's tribes first attacked the neighboring White Man tribe. The Black Man tribe did not speak Chinese like the White Man tribe, and like the people of the grasslands, most of them used cow and sheepskins as clothing. More accurately speaking, the Black Man tribe were the indigenous people of the area, and most of the White Man tribe were Han people who had been transformed into barbarians. This was also why the White Man tribe had a higher level of culture than the Black Man tribe and mainly relied on farming and sericulture as their main economic model. Because the great chieftain of the Black Man tribe, Meng Zhizhu, ruled over a large area, and his subordinates were nomads who lived by water and grass. His whereabouts were not very certain. Usually it was very difficult to find him, but this time was different, because the imperial envoy of the great Zhou dynasty had arrived, when Hao had already sent someone to invite him. Even though Meng Zhizhu did not come, he did not immediately return to the depths of the grasslands. Instead, he stayed in a tribe that was relatively close to Yao State City, so Xuanqi found him very easily. "Ha, Honorable Chieftain Xuanqi, what a rare guest. Why have you come to my place?" When Xuanqi walked into Meng Zhizhu's tall building that was made of bamboo and wood, Meng Zhizhu was sitting cross-legged, holding a bowl of hand-grabbed mutton and chewing. Large pieces of mutton with bones were stewed until soft and tender, plump and salty. Meng Zhizhu grabbed both ends of the mutton bone with both hands. His big face was almost buried in the meat, and his cheeks were greasy from eating. Xuanqi walked in front of him and sat cross-legged. His expression was abnormally serious. "This old man has come to find you to discuss the matter of sending troops together." Meng Zhizhu's big face was still buried in the meat bone, and he was eating until it was watery. Xuanqi slammed his fist on the table and shouted, "Zhizhu, you little bastard! Did you hear what this old man said?" Meng Zhizhu raised his head from the meat bone. Although this big man's movements were rough, he had thick eyebrows and big eyes, but he was actually a talented person. His face was full of heroic spirit, and his beard was like a halberd, which added a bit of power to him. This kind of big man was far more like a big-headed person of a tribe than Xuanqi. However, his expression was a bit lazy, and his beard and cheeks were covered in greasy gravy, which somewhat affected his heroic spirit. Looking at his age, this Meng Zhizhu was at most in his early 30s, so it was no wonder that Xuanqi would call him little brat when he was angry. Meng Zhizhu laughed and said, "Ha! You white nightmare. People have always looked down on us black nightmare people. I didn't think that you would actually be willing to ally with us this time. What is even more unexpected is that you, Chieftain Xuanqi, would actually personally come to see a junior like me." Xuanqi did not pay attention to his teasing and said solemnly, "You don't need to pretend. I know that your clansmen have also been plundered by them before. With your Meng family's temperament, it would be strange if you were willing to endure this kind of humiliation." Xuanqi paused and then said, "You should be able to see that although that bastard imperial envoy wants to stir up trouble here, this is also an attempt by the Yun and Wen families to challenge the status of our two families. If I lose, do you think there will be any benefits for you at that time?" Meng Zhizhu chuckled and grabbed a large towel to wipe his face, then his hands. He threw the towel on the table and said unconcernedly, "Those two idiots Wen Hao and Yun Xian think that Xuanqi Tu has already become a toothless tiger, but I know that Xuanqi Tu's fangs and claws are still sharp. They are not a match for you." Xuanqi calmly said, "Why do they dare to make a move against this old man? It is not because they think that I am old, but because behind them stands the imperial envoy of the court. If I endure this kind of humiliation, I will never be able to raise my head in Yao province again. If I can't endure it, I am not afraid of them allying together. However, although that imperial envoy is greedy and cruel, he is not a muddle-headed person. I am afraid that when they made their move, they had already begun to ask for troops from the court. If the court sends troops, I will not be able to do anything alone. If I am swallowed up, you will not have an easy time either. Without wood, you cannot build a house, and without neighbors, you will not be able to live well." Meng Zhizhu's expression became serious and said, "If the neighbors are safe, then you will also be safe. This principle I understand. Tribe leader Xuanqi wants to form an alliance with my tribe. That is fine. However, I have a condition." Xuanqi said, "Speak." Meng Zhizhu said, "I want your daughter, Lady Sun Heir, to be my woman." Xuanqi's expression became serious, but Meng Zhizhu did not avoid it. His expression was very serious. Xuanqi stared at him for a long time, then slowly said, "She is my most beloved daughter." Meng Zhizhu said, "And the most beautiful golden flower in tribe leader Xuanqi." Xuanqi said, "If you want to marry her, that is fine, but she must become a bumpkin queen." Meng Zhizhu grinned widely. Of course. My bumpkin died of illness last year, not even leaving behind a child for me. If Sun heir becomes my woman, not only will she be a bumpkin of my barbarian 7 tribes, but if she gives birth to a son for me, he will become the tribe leader in the future. The men of the barbarian tribe never did things sloppily, and matters of life and death could be decided in a few words. Xuanqi did not say anything else, directly extending her right hand to Meng Zhizhu. It is a deal. Pa, pa, pa. The 3 claps of hands were more effective than an oath of undying love, more authoritative than an official letter with the imperial seal. The 2 strongest tribes in the Yao State region had officially joined hands. A single spark burned into a raging inferno, and the 2 raging infernos combined into a huge fire that soared into the night. On the 3rd day of the alliance between the white barbarians and the barbarians, Yao State City was breached. Tribe leader Wen Hao and tribe leader Yun Xian took imperial envoy Huang Jingrong and fled in panic, fleeing into the Wen family's nest deep in the mountains. The series of changes in the Yao State region confused Jiang Fan. He had not done a single thing he wanted to do, but everything had developed according to his expectations. In fact, it had developed even faster and more thoroughly than he had imagined. When Yao State City was breached, Yang Fan finally came to his senses. He felt that he could not continue watching like this. He should act immediately. He had originally come to Yao State to light the fire, but now it had become extinguish the fire. He had to extinguish the huge fire that the stupid pig Huang Jingrong had ignited. Chapter 5:22. When Yang Fan decided to take action, he realized how difficult it was for a person to do something in the chaos of war. This was not as simple as he and Zhang Jianji had thought it would be. Wait for the conflict to intensify and the brute tribe to rebel, then find their leader, understand the pros and cons, and persuade them to stop fighting. Then, use this opportunity to write a letter to impeach the imperial envoy office. Using the backlash from the local people, they could force the empress to use the imperial envoy office as a scapegoat and quell the anger of the world. Now that the brute tribe had really rebelled, the first thing Yang Fan had to do was find their leader. Just this was not an easy task. Everywhere was chaos. The soldiers that Wen Hao and Yun Xian did not have time to take with them split up and fought guerrilla warfare with the soldiers of the white brute tribe and the black brute tribe. The armies of both sides were usually farmers, woodcutters, fishermen, and shepherds. There was no discipline to speak of. In addition, they had to rely on themselves for all their supplies. If the armies were too concentrated, they would not be able to find enough food to fill their stomachs. So, other than the stage of attacking Yaozhou City, the armies of both sides were split up and fought scattered. This kind of fighting style was very suitable for the tribes here. The scale of this kind of battle was not small for the brute tribe, but in the eyes of Yang Fan, who had already seen large armies fight, it was not worth mentioning. But this kind of battle was actually more suitable for the mountainous and river-filled terrain. Small groups of troops could move nimbly, and it was convenient to resupply. It was far from what an entire army could compare to. The imperial court's troops actually had this concern when they used their troops here. Their military superiority could not be displayed here, and they would be dragged to death by the guerrilla warfare that was everywhere. This kind of scattered fighting that occurred everywhere created great difficulties for travelers, especially for a foreigner like Yang Fan, who had been born in this place. It was even more difficult for him to move. He had underestimated Huang Jingrong's ability to cause trouble. When he hurried to Yaozhou before he could even catch his breath, Huang Jingrong had forced Sun Qi to rebel. Yang Fan had just returned from the Southeast Sea. He did not understand the lingering sense of superiority that people like Huang Jingrong had. The arrogance and contempt of the imperial envoy towards the barbarians were not limited to Huang Jingrong. In the various borderlands, there were many people who could drive the barbarian chiefs like dogs. Even in the Tang dynasty, which was the most tolerant of other races, and Li Shimin had made it a national policy to barbarians are one family. This was not uncommon. Yang Fan spent 2 days to not find the Sun Chi chieftain of the White Brute tribe and was instead suspected to be a spy by a few Brute tribe soldiers who did not understand the language. If he was not skilled, he would have been killed. Just when Yang Fan was at his wits' end, the situation on the battlefield suddenly changed. The soldiers of Feng Zhou, Rongzhou, and Lingnan rushed to Yao Zhou to quell the rebellion. When the White Brute tribe and the Black Brute tribe heard the news, they immediately pulled back their troops and retreated to their original territory. Huang Jingrong turned around and swaggered back. In fact, the soldiers of Feng Zhou, Rongzhou, and Lingnan did not come so quickly. Otherwise, Sun Chi and Meng Zhizhu's troops would have reached the border of Feng Zhou and would not have been able to retreat so easily. After all, the army of the imperial court was well trained, and the generals were well versed in the art of war. These tribal soldiers, who had only experienced small-scale conflicts, could not be compared to them. As long as the army of the imperial court pursued and blocked them in an orderly manner, they would definitely suffer heavy casualties. Feng Zhou, Rongzhou, and Lingnan had indeed sent troops, but not many. When Huang Jingrong decided to plunder the White Brute tribe and the Black Brute tribe stronghold and provoke them, she had already quickly asked for help from the generals stationed in Feng Zhou, Rongzhou, and Lingnan. She said that they had discovered that the people suspected of rebelling were being protected by the Brute tribe. The Brute tribe had ulterior motives and might attack the imperial envoy of the imperial court. She asked the generals of the 3 regions to send troops to help suppress the situation. After the generals of the 3 regions received the imperial envoy's letter, they each sent a guard to Yao Zhou as reinforcements. Because it was just a precaution and they were not sure that the Brute tribe would rebel, the purpose of sending troops was only to strengthen the imperial envoy's reputation and intimidate the other regions not to act rashly, so they did not send a lot of troops. But when they were halfway there, Yao Zhou was already a pile of rubble. Huang Jingrong fled to Wenhao stronghold and sent out a messenger to contact the reinforcements. When she heard that the reinforcements had arrived, she immediately got in touch with them and raised a banner, claiming that Feng Zhou, Rongzhou, and Lingnan had each sent 30,000 troops, a total of 90,000 soldiers to Yao Zhou. The White Brute tribe and the Black Brute tribe did not know the details and could only retreat in a hurry. These 3 reinforcements were weak in strength and were only bluffing. They did not dare to split up their troops to avoid being taken advantage of by the Brute tribe. So the White Brute tribe and the Black Brute tribe calmly retreated to their territory, and the imperial court soldiers also recaptured the city of Yao Zhou without shedding any blood. This unexpected incident created an opportunity for Yang Fan. Since the White Brute tribe and the Black Brute tribe had retreated and their troops were concentrated in one place, it would be much easier for him to find the enemy's chieftain. And now that the imperial court's army had the upper hand, it created the best opportunity for him to negotiate. Thinking of this, Yang Fan immediately rushed to the White Brute tribe's stronghold. The place Yang Fan chose was the White River tribe. This was the White Brute tribe's stronghold closest to Yao Zhou. The last time Yang Fan came from Yao Zhou, he had asked the people of this tribe for directions and even asked for a drink of water from one of their girls. Yang Fan had a very good impression of them and felt that the people of this tribe were very friendly. Perhaps it would be very easy for him to contact their chieftain, Kaori, through their chief. Yang Fan led his horse and stood on the hillside, silently looking at the paddy fields in front of him. Standing on the hillside and looking down, the irregular paddy fields looked even more like the surface of a broken mirror. The white clouds of Lantian were still reflected in the water, but they had already lost the poetic atmosphere. This was because the originally neat bunches of rice in the paddy fields were now crooked. Some were completely collapsed in the water, while others struggled to raise their heads. It was a scene of desolation. In the distance, there were no fishermen casting nets on the jade-like river, and there were no boatmen rowing boats. There were no girls carrying water on the winding mountain road, and even less of that sweet and moving song. Yang Fan walked slowly. Suddenly, he stopped and squatted down to take a look. There was a puddle of black and purple congealed substance on the ground. It was dried blood. Yang Fan let out a light sigh and looked around. He then walked along the path that he had taken the other day. Whoosh! As soon as the sound entered his ears, Yang Fan quickly dodged and at the same time held his saber horizontally in front of his chest. An arrow suddenly stabbed into the ground 3 feet in front of him. A loud shout came from the forest. It was spoken in the local language, and Yang Fan did not understand what the other party was shouting. Yang Fan was secretly shocked and broke out in a cold sweat. Fortunately, the other party's arrow was of a warning nature. Otherwise, with the speed of the arrow and the cover of the branches and leaves of the forest, it would have been difficult for him to dodge. 7 or 8 mountain people suddenly emerged from the forest with spears in their hands. They were dressed in white, but it was unknown how they hid themselves. Even with Yang Fan's sharp senses, he did not notice any clues. The mountain people here were indeed natural forest combat experts. Their concealment technique could perfectly conceal their body and breath. Even the most sensitive beasts could not easily detect them, let alone humans. Don't attack. I have an important matter to discuss with your chief. As soon as Yang Fan saw someone appear, he immediately put away his saber and raised his hands to show that he was not hostile. At the same time, he shouted at the top of his lungs. Unexpectedly, when the other party heard his voice, they became angry. It's a Han. He must be Huang Jingrong's man. Kill him. The main body of the white barbarians were originally Han people. It was just that they had lived in the area for a long time and had become barbarian. However, they had not forgotten their mother tongue. As soon as they heard Yang Fan speak in Chinese, the people immediately switched to Chinese. Some shouted in surprise, some turned to report to the distant forest, and some could not hold back and pounced on Yang Fan with red eyes. Don't attack. I'm not Huang Jingrong's man. Yang Fan did not want to fight back, so he could only dodge to the side and very nimbly avoided the 3 spears. The other mounted people saw that Yang Fan was skilled and actually rushed over together. 7 or 8 spears fiercely stabbed at him. Yang Fan could only retreat to the side of the forest and continued to shout, I have an important matter to discuss with your chief. Don't attack. Whoosh! As Yang Fan retreated, he suddenly tripped, as if he had tripped on a rope. Yang Fan was shocked. He had been in Southeast Asia for a long time and had personally made and even set up traps and hidden weapons to capture beasts, so he was not unfamiliar with these things. Sure enough, a bamboo racket full of sharp bamboo stakes pounced towards him. If he was hit by it, his body would immediately have more than a dozen see-through holes. At this time, behind him, 7 or 8 sharp spears were also thrusting towards him. On the other side, there was a big tree on one side, and on the other side was an open field. In a split second, Yang Fan immediately thought that if it was him, he would definitely dig a big hole in the open field and stick sharp bamboo in it. These mountain people were skilled hunters and would not have thought of this, so he immediately rushed towards the big tree. He was so fast that it seemed like he was going to crash into the thick tree. The bamboo racket hit empty air, and the spears also missed their target. Yang Fan rushed towards the bottom of the tree. Just as he was about to crash into the tree, he exerted force with both feet on the ground and wanted to use the momentum to jump up to the top of the tree. In the end, with a tap of his foot, a large net suddenly sprang up from the dead leaves and branches, trapping him within. The rope quickly tightened, and his whole body was suspended in the air. Yang Fan still had a knife in his hand. He immediately pulled it out and looked down. Then he obediently sheathed the knife and gave up resisting. Another 7 or 8 mountain people rushed out from below, holding simple bamboo bows in their hands. They were pointing at him, who was trapped in the net. It was impossible for him to avoid these arrows while he was trapped in the net. The bamboo bows and arrows used by these mountain people were much more powerful than the bows and arrows used by the Tang and northern nomads. Even if they hit the human body, they would not penetrate too deeply. But Yang Fan knew that the power of the southern people's arrows did not lie in the arrow itself, but in the various strange poisons on the arrowheads. Even if it was just a scratch, It was enough to take his life. This was far more terrifying than a real hard crossbow. The only thing Yang Fan could do was to shout, "Don't do it! I have something to discuss with your chief. I know your little princess, Sun Air. I also know Miss Sun Air's sister-in-law." Chapter 5:23. The stronghold was backed by a green mountain with steep cliffs on both sides. Behind it was a mountain peak that pierced through the clouds. With Yang Fan's eyesight, he could tell at a glance that the stronghold was easy to defend and hard to attack. If a stone fortress was built here with enough food and soldiers, even an army of 100,000 would have a hard time taking it down. But it was easier said than done. The stronghold was not big, and it was not an important military location. It did not have the ability to build a stone fortress, nor was it necessary to spend generations to build a stone fortress. The walls of the stronghold were built with bamboo, wood, and earth according to the terrain of the mountain. It was not very tall, and its main purpose was to prevent wild beasts from entering. Yang Fan thought of the girls he had seen with their backs against the water. He guessed that there was no running water in this stronghold that was built on a high mountain. Without a water source, no matter how sturdy the fortress was, no matter how much food and soldiers there were inside, it would not be able to defend it for long. The stronghold gate was made of wood and was very rough. It was not even plain flat. It could be seen that the gate had just been repaired. Walking into the stronghold, one could see that many of the houses were half collapsed in ashes. There were charred beams and blackened walls. It was obvious that this place had just suffered a military disaster not long ago. Some of the commoners were cleaning up the rubble. The atmosphere in the stronghold was a little oppressive. When they saw someone carrying a large net back with a person wrapped in it like a fish, they did not have any special reactions. They only glanced at him indifferently and then continued with their own work. Yang Fan grabbed the rough net with both hands and looked at the situation in the stronghold. An indescribable anger filled his chest. He was carried to a large hall that was still in good condition. There were many marks of knives and axes on the pillars of the hall. A beam that could only be reached by climbing a ladder had a few bamboo arrows stuck in it. It seemed like there was no time to clean them up. From the remnants of the scene, one could imagine how intense the battle had been. Yang Fan was released from the net. Of course, before he was untied, his hands and feet were tied up tightly with beef tendons like a pig's trotters. Then he was hung upside down on the beam with a rope. Yang Fan did not resist. Since the other party had carried him back, his life was temporarily safe. As long as he could see their chief and explain the situation, he believed that the situation would immediately change. There were no walls in the hall, so it was quite cool to be inside. The only flaw was that there was no wine to serve the guests. Yang Fan was hung upside down in the hall, like a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. A burly man with a hint of hostility between his brows slowly walked in front of him, coldly sizing him up. The man asked, "Who are you?" "You know our Miss Sun Air?" Yang Fan said, "That's right. I am Miss Sun Air's friend. I'm not a spy sent by Huang Jingrong. I'm here to see your chief. I have something important to discuss with him. Our chief has died in battle. There's no chief here now. If you have something to say it to me." The burly man's voice was a little gloomy. When Yang Fan heard this, his heart sank. He had already understood the power structure of the tribes in the Yaozhou region. At the rank of chief, it was not hereditary. The chief was a highly respected clansman elected by the people of the village. After being confirmed by the chief or headman, he would become the chief of the village. If the original chief had died before the chief or headman confirmed it, no one in the village would dare to call themselves the chief and take charge of the affairs of the village. That would be looking down on the chief. Since the person in front of him had come out to ask him questions, he should be someone with some prestige in the village. However, it was impossible for him to have the authority to interfere with official matters. Yang Fan frowned and said, "Then can you get in touch with your chief? My matter is very important. It concerns the survival of your tribe. This matter can only be discussed with your chief. I can't tell you the details. The burly man seemed to have heard an absurd joke and laughed loudly. Do you know how busy our chief is right now? Do you know how much work we have to do in our village? Just because of one word from you, I have to invite the chief to see you, or even travel through mountains and rivers to send you to see the chief. The burly man pulled out a sharp, short knife from his waist and said coldly, If you really have something important to say, then say it immediately. Otherwise, I won't waste my breath with you. I'll kill you with one slash and throw you into the ravine to feed the wolves. I'm a friend of your Miss Sun Air. The burly man laughed coldly. You think I'll believe you just because you say it? How could Miss Sun Air know you? Even I've only seen her twice. As the two were talking, a pretty girl walked in with a water basket on her back. She put down the basket and poured a ladle of water. She said to the burly man, Brother Ching Shan, drink some water. As the girl spoke, she glanced at Yang Fan and suddenly let out a soft cry. She cried out involuntarily, How come it's you? The person she called Brother Ching Shan looked at her with a sharp gaze and asked, You know him? The girl nodded and said, Yes, he passed by here a few days ago and asked us for directions. Brother Ching Shan immediately asked, How many people were with him and what was he wearing? The girl said he was alone. He was wearing clothes for traveling and even had a saddlebag. He asked us for directions to Yao State City. Brother Ching Shan looked at Yang Fan again. Although there was still some suspicion in his eyes, his voice had already softened. You really aren't one of Huang Jingrong's people, or the lackey of Wen Hao and Yun Xian. Then tell me, what is it? Yang Fan hesitated for a moment and said, This is very important. There cannot be too many people involved. Do you really want to hear it? Brother Ching Shan frowned slightly and said, Don't be deliberately mystifying. What is your identity? Yang Fan said in a deep voice, I am an imperial envoy. An imperial envoy sent by the imperial court. What? The able-bodied men who were scattered all around immediately rushed forward and glared at Yang Fan with hatred in their eyes. Huang Jingrong and I are not on the same side. I'm here to supervise his actions in Jiannan, Yang Fan said with a deep voice. Just as the burly man was feeling bewildered, he suddenly heard a clear female voice calling out, Gao Ching Shan. Brother Ching Shan looked up and his face lit up with joy. He hurriedly led his men forward and greeted respectfully, Young Miss. Yang Fan was tied up in the air and could not see what was happening behind him. He only heard the female voice say, Father, elder brother, and the other headmen are busy and could not send anyone over in time. They asked me to bring some men to help guard the village. Has your chief died in battle? Gao Ching Shan grunted in response. The female voice said loudly, What are you looking so dejected for? Who doesn't die? Whoever killed our men will be punished with weapons. Who is this person? Is he one of Wen Hao and Yun Xian's soldiers? Gao Ching Shan said, No, this person passed through our territory and was captured by us. At first, he said that he knew you and I scared him with a knife. He then said that he is an imperial envoy from the Great Zhou and has important matters to discuss with our chieftain. I am not sure which part of his words is true. I am currently interrogating him. Oh! Yang Fan heard the rustling of footsteps, and from the corner of his eye, he saw a pretty figure. The lady slowly turned to face him. Yang Fan's limbs were dangling in the air in a ridiculous manner. His eyes followed the figure of the lady, and when their eyes met, Yang Fan cried out in surprise, Miss Sun Air! This lady was Sun Air. She was dressed in a white blouse, a red waistcoat, blue pants, and white shoes. She was clean and pretty, and she wore a crescent white hat with a white tassel hanging down her shoulders. She was as beautiful as a mountain spring, holding on to her horsewhip. She looked at Yang Fan in astonishment. After a long while, she exclaimed, It's you! Gao Ching Shan asked, Miss, do you really know him? Sun Air looked at Yang Fan and then at Gao Ching Shan. She used her horsewhip to lightly tap Yang Fan's shoulder and asked, You said he is an imperial envoy from the Great Zhou? Gao Qingshan said, he said to himself. Sun Er snorted and raised her little Yao nose. She said in disdain, Imperial envoy? Pah, this is a swindler, a big swindler who goes around swindling people. What? Gao Qingshan was furious. He drew his knife and said, I will kill him. Slow down, slow down. Sun Er used the tip of her whip to gently push Gao Qingshan's knife away. She smiled at Yang Fan and said, Big swindler, you are quite daring. You didn't get any benefits from my sister-in-law, and you actually came to Yaozhou to swindle people. In Yaozhou, you are a fugitive. In Yaozhou, you become an imperial envoy. That is incredible. If you continue to head south, won't you become the emperor when you reach Nanzhao? Yang Fan smiled bitterly and said, Miss Sun Er, I really am an imperial envoy from the Great Zhou. Shut up. Sun Er glared at him. Her little nose wrinkled up. Will you die if you don't brag? Looking at you, I know that you are not someone sent by Huang Jingrong. You are afraid that you will be killed by the people in the stronghold. That is why you are speaking nonsense, right? All right, right. Stop pretending. Seeing that you are acquainted with my sister-in-law, I will not make things difficult for you. Sun Er waved her little hand and ordered Gao Qingshan, put him down first. This is a swindler who goes around swindling food and drinks. He is not someone extraordinary. Yes, Gao Qingshan replied. He waved his hand and 4 strong men came forward to untie Yang Fan. Yang Fan's feet landed on the ground. His hands were still tied behind his back. He said to Sun Er, Miss Sun Er, to tell you the truth, I am indeed an imperial envoy from the imperial court. Sun Er handsomely crossed her arms. Her hand stroked her smooth and round chin. She teased, Oh, so what are you wanting coming here, Sir Imperial Envoy? Is it gold or women? Or both? Aren't you Han people all so greedy? Humph! You still dare to talk nonsense. Do you believe that I will not whip you? Yang Fan sighed. The imperial edict is in my belt. If Miss does not believe me, you can take a look. Sun Er's black eyes turned. She suspiciously said, Go and untie his belt. Yang Fan was now dressed in civilian clothes. His belt was only a sweatband. It was not old. A village guard went forward to untie the sweatband around Yang Fan's waist. He shook his hand and a yellow silk cloth floated down. The village guard bent down to pick it up and presented it to Sun Er. Sun Er took the yellow silk cloth and looked at it. It was the back. There was an exquisite golden embroidered pattern of 2 dragons playing with a pearl. Sun Er's expression became serious. She turned the yellow silk cloth over and looked at it carefully. She slowly raised her face. Her pretty face was covered with a layer of frost. Sun Er said with hostility, You are indeed from the imperial court. Why did you come to our village? At this moment, a shrill shout suddenly rang out in the distance. The entire village was immediately in an uproar. Someone grabbed a spear and ran towards the village wall. As he ran, he shouted, Enemy attack! Enemy attack! Clanging sounds rang out incessantly in the hall as the stockade keepers drew their sabers one after another and surrounded Yang Fan like a pack of vicious wolves. Chapter 5:24. Wait. Sun Er stopped the restless bandits and said to Gao Qingshan, The White River stronghold doesn't have a chief. I will now officially appoint you as the chief of the White River stronghold. Immediately bring some men to the stronghold. If there are enemies, you must repel them. Gao Qingshan said excitedly, Yes. As long as Gao Qingshan is alive, don't even think about letting an enemy step into our stronghold. Don't worry, miss. After Gao Qingshan finished speaking, he picked up his steel saber and rushed to the stronghold. Sun Er turned to Yang Fan and said in a low voice, What's going on? Yang Fan said, How would I know? You should understand that this has nothing to do with me. As an imperial envoy, I have no reason to be a spy. Moreover, Yang Fan coldly swept his eyes over the aggressive soldiers and said, "What's there to spy on in this stronghold? If you hadn't arrived just in time, I would have been killed by these reckless fellows. What could I have found out?" Sun Er snorted, "That's fine. Whatever you want to discuss with my father, we can talk about it later. Right now, your soldiers have already attacked the base of my stronghold. Make them retreat first." Yang Fan said, "Those are not my soldiers. They are Huang Jingrong's soldiers. I want to see your esteemed father for something important. Now that you have pushed me to the stronghold wall, the soldiers outside may not believe me. If news of me being here is exposed, it won't be a good thing for you." Sun Er said coldly, "I don't know what tricks you court officials are playing, but since you say you are the imperial envoy supervising Huang Jingrong, why can't you retreat? He, the imperial envoy, has sent his soldiers, but you, the imperial envoy, can't retreat? If that's the case, what's there to discuss with you? This is a war. Do you think it's a joke? Every moment you delay will mean more casualties in our stronghold. Are you going to retreat or not?" Yang Fan said, "Miss Sun Er, it's not that I don't want to retreat, but—" Sun Er interrupted him and ordered the soldiers with a cold face, "Drag him to the stronghold wall. If the officials don't retreat, behead this imperial envoy." Miss Sun Er. Before Yang Fan could finish his words, he was rudely pushed out by the villagers. At the foot of the mountain was Wen Hao's army. After Wu Man and Bai Man joined forces to trap his Yao prefecture city, Wen Hao didn't dare to continue fighting and immediately escaped. When the army of the imperial court arrived, he returned to Yao prefecture city. In this battle, there were casualties on all sides. Now that white man and black man had retreated, Wen Hao's morale was greatly boosted. His subordinates' cries for revenge grew louder. Wen Hao had no choice but to put on a show to appease his subordinates. He could not command the troops and horses of the imperial court, but he was confident that with the imperial court's 3 guards in Yaozhou, he did not have to worry about the rear. So he ordered his subordinates to attack the White River stockade village to vent his anger. When Yang Fan arrived at the stronghold, the 2 sides were fighting fiercely. Although the mountain was dangerous, the walls of the stronghold were not high. Furthermore, the walls were built against the mountain, so they could be built however they wanted. Thus, they were not suitable for defending the city. Thus, the 2 sides did not have any necessary siege weapons or defensive weapons. For long-range attacks, they used bows and arrows and bamboo spears, while for close combat, they used sabers, spears, swords, and halberds. Both sides were basically like this. The attacking side had the advantage in numbers, while the defending side had a certain geographical advantage. Thus, the 2 sides reached a temporary equilibrium. Yang Fan was brought to the top of the stronghold. One of the stronghold guards covered his mouth and shouted a few words to the people below. In the end, the soldiers did not stop attacking the stronghold. Instead, they attracted a volley of arrows. The few stronghold guards panicked and hurriedly dodged. Yang Fan's hands were tied behind his back, and no one helped him block the arrows. Fortunately, Yang Fan was nimble. With a flip, he dodged behind a huge rock. A few of the villagers also squeezed over, and one of them said suspiciously, "It seems like they don't give you any face as an imperial envoy?" Yang Fan said, "My identity is a secret, so how could ordinary soldiers know? If you want a temporary truce here, how would you do it?" The village leader said, "You're an imperial envoy, yet you don't even know this. Raise a white flag." Yang Fan was overjoyed and said, "So the flag for a temporary truce here is also a white flag. Then quickly find a piece of white cloth and ask them to temporarily stop fighting. Only then can I call their generals to come forward and talk to them." The village leader curled his lips and said, "You think we can stop fighting just because you say so? Unless the chief gives the order." Yang Fan said angrily, "Then go find your chief and give the order. How can I talk to them when you guys are killing each other like this?" The village leader hesitated for a moment, then said to the others, "You guys keep a close eye on him. I'll go find the chief." After saying this, he bent down and went to find Gao Qingshan. Yang Fan turned around and looked down from the big rock. The attacking soldiers were wearing the Tang Army's uniform, but their weapons and equipment were the weapons used by the local armed forces. Narrow and short sabers and light rattan shields. The standard weapons of the Tang dynasty were indeed not necessarily suitable for the terrain here. While they were blocking the arrows that were shot at them, they used the ravines and strange rocks as cover and slowly made their way towards the walls of the village. The walls were not high, not even 20 feet high. A few bamboo ladders were placed on the walls and were about a meter away from the top of the wall. They did not stick their heads out to avoid being pushed down, but as long as they could climb up the ladders, they only needed to flip over a meter high and they would be able to cross over. While Yang Fan was watching, some fresh troops suddenly ran out from the village and joined the defense. The defense of the village was immediately tightened. Yang Fan turned his head and saw a soldier running towards him. This was really a soldier in full military uniform. The people guarding the stronghold were all wearing ordinary knockoff clothing. Occasionally, a few of them would wear a set of two-piece rattan armor that covered their chest and back. However, the person running to his side was wearing a very rare sleeve armor. It was said to be rare because this kind of standard armor was very old. Yang Fan had never seen such armor in the Tang Dynasty army. If he remembered correctly, he seemed to have seen soldiers wearing this kind of armor in some ancient murals when he was in the western region. Was that the Qin Dynasty or the Han Dynasty? The person's armor was made of small pieces of tortoiseshell pattern armor on the chest and back. The shoulders were equipped with iron sleeve armor and a leather belt was tied around the waist. On the head was a hood, and on the top of the helmet was a red mink tassel. Although the style of the armor was simple and unadorned, it was polished and maintained very well. Under the sunlight, it flashed with a metallic luster and was very textured. The person wearing the armor and helmet was very beautiful. She had a jade face and red lips, bright eyes, and white teeth. When a woman was wearing a military uniform, she was indeed very beautiful. Even if she wore the hard armor, with a wide belt around her waist, it could still show off the soft and beautiful curves of her waist. Sun Er ran to Yang Fan's side and glared at him. "What are you looking at?" Yang Fan laughed dryly and said, "Miss Sun Er, wearing this armor, you look valiant and formidable. Truly very awe-inspiring." Sun Er proudly said, "Of course." Yang Fan said, "It's just that your armor looks a little old. These pieces of armor, this helmet, although they are well maintained, looking at the marks on them, I'm afraid they are quite old. And the style of this armor, I've been in the army before, but why haven't I seen it before? Could it be that this is the armor of the Qin dynasty?" Nonsense. Sun Er could roughly tell that Yang Fan was not praising her but ridiculing her. A faint blush appeared on her flawless, white face. She straightened her battle skirt and proudly said, "This is the Marquis Wu armor. Have you heard of it? This is the armor improved by Zhuge Marquis Wu. Back then, my Sun clan's ancestor helped Prime Minister Zhuge capture Meng, was 7 times and made a great contribution. The Shu Han Emperor personally conferred me the title of chieftain and bestowed me with 100 sets of armor improved by Zhuge Marquis Wu. Every generation of chieftain of my Sun clan has to bring a set with them when they pass away. Nowadays, there are not many left in this world. It took me a long time before my father finally gave me a set." Yang Fan coughed twice and said, "If you can persuade your father to cooperate with me, I will gift you a set of radiant armor in the future." Sun Er wrinkled her nose and said, "You want to bribe me? This is a gift from Zhuge Marquis Wu to my clan. Can you compare to Zhuge Marquis Wu?" Yang Fan said, "In terms of fame and ability, of course I can't compare to Zhuge Liang, but my radiant armor is better than his sleeve armor." Sun Er snorted disdainfully and said, "I don't care." She raised her head to look down the mountain. Just as she raised her head, An arrow flew over and hit her helmet with a dang sound. Sun Er cried out and quickly pulled her head back. Only then did she realize that the imperial envoy she was using to force the soldiers to retreat was chatting with her as if nothing had happened. Sun Er angrily placed her sharp scabbard on Yang Fan's neck and asked, "Why are they still fighting?" Yang Fan said, "This side is fighting, hovering between life and death. Who has the leisure to listen to what the people above are shouting? I've already sent someone to inform your chief, asking him to stop fighting for now and wait for them to stop before we discuss anything else. However, if I appear now, I'm afraid it won't be of much use. Huang Jingrong and I don't get along well, and he is unscrupulous." Sun Er withdrew her sword and turned her face away. She said, "If you don't appear after this battle, there will be many more deaths in the stronghold. There will be many more orphans and widows. No matter what, we have to try." Yang Fan sighed softly. After a while, Gao Qingshan rushed over. After getting Sun Er's approval, he raised a white flag. The white flag represented a temporary ceasefire on the ancient battlefield. The person supervising the battle at the foot of the mountain was the head steward of Wenhao tribe, Ling Patian. Wenhao was the chieftain of his tribe and also the military governor of Yaozhou. As the head steward, he had two identities. He was both Wenhao's head steward and Wenhao's military major. Ling Patian sat on a big rock and was supervising the battle with a saber. Suddenly, he saw a white flag waving left and right. He couldn't help but stand up and asked in bewilderment, "Could it be that they want to surrender?" Ling Patian shouted, "Truce! Truce! Let's see what they have to say." Dang, dang, dang. The Yun clansmen who were attacking the mountain immediately retreated when they heard the gong. Steward Ling took a few steps forward and caught up with two soldiers on his left and right. They used vine shields that were as tall as a person to protect him. Ling Patian covered his mouth with his hand and shouted towards the stronghold, "Are you guys going to surrender?" Gao Qingshan shouted, "T. I have one standing and one lying down. I won't do such a spineless thing." Ling Patian said angrily, "Then what are you waving the white flag for? Are you trying to make fun of me?" Gao Qingshan said, "I'll let you know that your imperial envoy has already been captured by us. You guys quickly withdraw your troops. Otherwise, I will chop off his head." Chief Steward Ling was secretly shocked. He thought, how did Huang Jingrong get captured by them? Could it be that their people have sneaked into Yaozhou City? On the stronghold, after Gao Qingshan finished shouting, he pulled Yang Fan out and pushed him in front of him. Chapter 5:25. Ling Patian fixed his eyes on the stronghold and saw Yang Fan's appearance clearly. He laughed and said, "What the hell? What imperial envoy is this? Lousy doesn't know him." "You don't know me. I'm also an imperial envoy." Since things had come to this, Yang Fan had to speak. He was someone who practiced internal martial arts, so when he inhaled and exhaled, his voice floated far and clear. Everyone in the stronghold could hear him clearly. This imperial envoy was ordered to inspect the people of the Tao and also to supervise the previous imperial envoy Huang Jingrong. Huang Jingrong handled matters improperly and incited the black and white man tribes. This imperial envoy has investigated this matter clearly. All of you, quickly retreat and stop fighting. This imperial envoy wants to meet the black and white man tribes' chieftains and settle this matter properly. Ling Potion's tone became weaker and said, You say you're an imperial envoy. What proof do you have?" Yang Fan said, "I have an imperial edict in my hands. Do you have the guts to come up and take a look?" Ling Patian was stunned and snorted, "Are you trying to scare me? Once this official goes up the stronghold wall, can I still come back?" Yang Fan said, "I knew you wouldn't come up, but this imperial envoy's imperial edict is an important token and can't be thrown down the stronghold. I still have a kanhi here. Since you're an official of the imperial court, you should recognize it. Take it and take a look." Yang Fan turned his head and said to Sun Er, "My horse is in your hands and there's a seal in the saddle. Get someone to bring it over. Otherwise they won't believe my identity. Sun Er sent someone to lead Yang Fan's horse over. Yang Fan's canhe was hidden at the armrest in front of the saddle. When the wooden part of the leather covering was lifted up, there was a small hidden box in the middle. When it was opened, there was a glistening yellow seal. Sun Er ordered someone to wrap up the piece of cloth with the seal that acted as the white flag and threw it far away at the foot of the stockade. Ling Pa-Tien ordered someone to retrieve the seal. Ling Pa-Tien opened the white cloth and took out the bronze seal to take a closer look. He couldn't help but be secretly shocked. He worked in the martial governor's office, so naturally he was familiar with this seal. This seal's specifications, patterns, and inscriptions were not something that could be easily forged, and it was even more impossible to forge in a hurry. The person in the stockade was most likely an official of the imperial court. Yang Fan continued, I have already met with Imperial Censor Huang in Pao Prefecture. Take this seal and see him. You can prove my identity. Tell Imperial Censor Huang to defend Yao Zhou and not to start another war. Tell him to send people to discuss with me. Ling Potion's expression flickered indeterminately, and he hesitated for a short while. In the end, he didn't dare disregard Yang Fan's identity as an imperial envoy and brazenly give the order to attack the mountain. He gritted his teeth and said with a loud voice, All right, since this is the case, this lowly official will hurry back to Yao Prefecture City. This lowly official still needs Imperial Censor Huang and the other officials to verify the authenticity of this ring. This lowly official needs to take it away. Farewell. Ling Pa-Tien cupped his hands towards the stronghold and roared, Retreat! Sun Er saw that Yao Zhou's troops and horses had indeed retreated. She couldn't help but jump with joy and said, Ha! This identity of yours is really useful. However, Yang Fan's expression was somewhat gloomy. After a moment of silence, he said to Miss Sun Er, Is it possible to evacuate all the commoners in your stockade? Sun Er looked at him strangely, but didn't ask why he wanted to evacuate. Instead, she directly replied, It's very difficult. This is their home. Perhaps their thatched huts and some simple and crude items won't enter your eyes. But that is all their property. They won't be willing to leave. Furthermore, in this kind of situation, not only are there many old, weak women and children in the stockade, there are also many injured soldiers. It will be even more difficult to leave. Even though this White River stockade is our territory, it is too far to the front. On the left and right are the Wen tribe. Now that the two tribes have already become enemies, if we leave, they will definitely take advantage of the situation. Your imperial edict can make the soldiers retreat, but it can't make those bloodthirsty tribal warriors retreat. Yang Fan asked her again, and only then did he find out the geographical location of this White River stockade. Most of the white barbarians were barbarian Han people. They called themselves the Chinese. The Chinese were the people of China. In a poem written by the Tang Dynasty Su Han, there was a saying, Be grateful to the disabled, return home. Do not let the Chinese become the dogs of war. At that time, there were still relatively few Han people who called themselves the people of the Central Plains, and the Han people called themselves the Chinese. The white barbarians of this White River stockade were naturally no exception. However, they had only been part of the white barbarians for a short period of time, a total of 200 years. Their ancestors were Yang, Li, Zhao, Dong, Chen, and more than 10 other surnames. They were all Chinese. Because of the chaos of war in the Central Plains, they fled to this place. At that time, there weren't many villages here, and it was a barren land that had never been developed. They opened a mountain here, built a stockade, and tidied up the terraced fields. Later, they married the local barbarians, and gradually became a member of the white barbarians. However, after 200 years of development, many villages had been built in this barren land. The power of the white barbarians did not expand in this direction. These villages all belonged to the Wen tribe, so the White River Stockade became the most prominent stockade of the white barbarians. The villages on the left and right were not of the same tribe. After Yang Fan understood the specific location, he knew that although this stockade was isolated and without help, it would be even more dangerous if they abandoned it. He couldn't persuade them to leave anymore. At the same time, he learned that the people in this stockade were originally of the same Chinese race, and that there were even people with the surname Yang, so he wanted to protect them even more. After Sun Er explained the situation to him, she asked, "Why do you want to move? Didn't you already withdraw your troops?" Yang Fan said, "That's right. These soldiers are Yao Zhou's soldiers. They don't dare to rashly attack the mountain, so they can only retreat. But I don't know what Huang Jingrong will decide." Sun Er's big black and white eyes stared at Yang Fan, and she asked curiously, "What do you mean?" Yang Fan said in a deep voice, "Maybe he will do as I said and withdraw his troops and send people to negotiate. Maybe the next time there will be more troops." Sun Er bit her thin red lips and said, "Are you trying to scare me? Isn't he afraid that I will kill you in anger?" Yang Fan said with a bitter smile, "I have never been on good terms with him. He can't wait to get rid of me. If you want to kill me, I'm afraid it will be to his liking." Sun Er said in surprise, "He dares to do this? Isn't he afraid of angering your emperor?" Yang Fan shook his head and said, "Miss Sun Er, the land that the emperor manages is 10,000 times larger than the land that your father manages. Your father may have more than 10 leaders under him, and they can see the chieftains at any time. But the emperor has tens of thousands of officials under him, and most of them can only guard the land that the emperor has designated for them to manage for their entire lives. Without an imperial edict, they cannot go anywhere else, let alone see the emperor. As for the emperor, she will always live in a palace as big as a city. Everything she knows is told to her by her officials, not what she saw or heard with her own eyes. If I die here, the emperor will definitely hear what Huang Jingrong wants to tell her. At that time, not only will Huang Jingrong not be punished, she might even be promoted." Sun Er stared at him with wide eyes, finding it hard to understand what he was saying. After a long time, she shook her head and said, "I don't understand. Among the leaders under my father, there were some who were not very obedient and were punished by my father after he found out. But even such a person wouldn't have the guts to do such a thing." Yang Fan said, "Of course you don't understand this matter, and there is no time for you to slowly understand it. Since you are here representing your father, there are only 2 things that you need to do immediately." Sun Er was flabbergasted and asked, "What do I need to do?" Yang Fan said, "The first thing is that you need to immediately send someone to find your father and tell him about the situation here. Tell him to split his troops to save us. At the same time, tell him that I am here. Tell him that if he really angers the court, it will not benefit him at all. Tell him to immediately negotiate peace with me. AI. In fact, the best method is for you to send me over, but I'm afraid you won't agree. Furthermore, if you really let me go now, I won't feel at ease. If I go to see your father, and you and the people in this stronghold are all captured in one fell swoop, I'm afraid your father and I won't have anything to talk about." Sun Er pretended not to hear the second half of his words and asked, "Then what is the second thing?" Yang Fan glared at her unhappily and said, "Did I say all that in vain? Prepare for war. Of course it is to prepare for war. The walls of the stronghold need to be higher, and the places that are prone to collapse need to be reinforced. Your stronghold doesn't have a water source, so you need to take advantage of the fact that they are retreating to quickly carry more water in preparation for defending. Also, you need to make some equipment to defend the city. If Huang Jingyuan is determined to have me die here, he won't dare to send reinforcements from the court. He can only use Wen Hao and Yun Xian soldiers. But if there are too many of them, your low stronghold walls won't be able to hold them off." Yang Fan was tied up there with his hands tied behind his back. He was clearly a prisoner, but he seemed to have become her strategist as he spoke. Sun Er was not angry, hearing that what he said was reasonable. She immediately followed his advice and began to make arrangements according to his instructions. Sun-Er sent a few of the stronghold men who were skilled horsemen to leave the stronghold and take a small path to find Chieftain Xuanqi. They were to quickly report the situation here and the news that an imperial envoy wanted to negotiate peace with him. She then had the old, young women and children carry bamboo baskets down the mountain to fetch water, while the young and strong men were responsible for reinforcing the walls of the stronghold. Yang Fan followed beside Sun-Er with his hands tied behind his back. This stronghold had never fought any intense battles before, so the people in the stronghold had no knowledge in this area. Under the direction of Sun-Er and Gao Qingshan, the people in the stronghold worked very seriously. However, they were so busy that their foreheads were covered in sweat, but they just couldn't get to the point. Yang Fan really couldn't take it anymore and couldn't help but follow beside Sun-Er. Wherever she went, Yang Fan would complain. As long as Sun-Er heard that his complaints were reasonable, she would immediately correct them. Yang Fan's knowledge of setting up a camp and defending the city was only half-baked. But for this stronghold with extremely primitive battle techniques, it was already extremely brilliant. Yang Fan continued to complain, and the more he talked, the smoother he became, until his spittle flew everywhere. Sun-Er suddenly turned around and glared at him, saying, "You do it!" Yang Fan was startled and said, "What do you mean, I do it?" Sun-Er angrily said, "Since you are so capable, of course you should be in charge of how to reinforce the city and how to strengthen the defenses." Yang Fan twisted his body toward her and said, "If you want me to advise you on military matters, shouldn't you at least untie me first?" Sun-Er stuck out her tongue and cried out, "Ah, I forgot. Someone come, untie him." Yang Fan stared at her and said in disbelief, "You haven't untied me, not because you don't trust me, but because have you forgotten?" Sun-Er said confidently, "Can't I?" Chapter 5:26. Yang Fan asked the people in the stockade to use local materials. They rammed a sharpened end of a piece of wood into the wall of the stockade and erected it to form a sturdy wooden wall. They used the gaps between the long and short pieces of wood as arrow mounds to prevent their bodies from being completely exposed to the enemy's attack range. The stockade men pushed the huge rocks in front of the stockade into the ravine. The trees on both sides of the stockade that could be used as cover were all chopped down and dragged into the stockade. They could be used to build the stockade walls and bunkers. Yang Fan also asked them to pile sand next to the bunkers in preparation for extinguishing the fire. Yang Fan also taught them to use bamboo and tough wood to make a simple catapult. One end of 2 long bamboos was tied to a net bag and the other end was fixed to the ground. The end of the net bag was placed on a bracket, and a rope fixed to the ground was used to tighten the top of the bamboo pole so that it bent downwards. After the stones were placed in the net bag, a woman only needed to use a wooden stick to pull the rope outward, and the 2 bamboos could pour the stones out of the net bag. Its disadvantage was that it was easy to damage, and the stones thrown were not big and had a short range. However, its advantage was that it was easy to make. Moreover, they were defending the city, so they did not need to throw heavy stones. A pile of stones the size of a fist was just right. The area of attack was large enough and could be fatal. The people in the stockade village also had some simple and effective defensive measures. They brought a lot of caltrops from the forest and scattered them all over the hillside. This kind of vine herb had triangular thorns on its outer shell, which could be pierced by ordinary cloth boots. Most of Wen Hao's native soldiers were barefoot, so it was not easy to clean up these caltrops and defend against the arrows shot from the stockade village. The road leading to the main gate was not paved with these things. Firstly, the women, the children, the old, and the young were still going back and forth endlessly, so they needed a path. Secondly, there was only one path left, which was not very useful to the attackers. They could not concentrate their forces on this kind of winding mountain path to attack the stronghold. Yang Fan leaned on the stockade wall to test the direction of the wind and asked Gao Qingshan a few questions to understand the changes in the wind direction in the mountains. He then asked people to prepare cow and horse dung, weeds, and some poisonous plants to make some simple poisonous smoke bombs. When the wind direction was right, these things could also cause a lot of trouble to the enemy. In addition, considering that once the stronghold was breached, the entire stronghold would be in a completely defenseless state, Yang Fan asked his men to build a second stronghold wall, with wooden stakes in a more dangerous place according to the terrain. In this way, once the stronghold was breached, they would not immediately be at the mercy of the enemy. They could retreat to the second bunker and continue fighting. Regardless of whether it was a city or a stockade, the weakest place was definitely the main gate. The gate of the White River Stockade was so simple that it was basically a fence. It was a symbolic existence to guard against the nobles, but not the villains. There was not enough time to temporarily install a hanging gate or a suspension bridge. So Yang Fan asked people to build a barbican inside the stockade gate with mud and stones. Barbicans had always been built outside the city, but they did not have enough firepower support on the stockade wall. The barbican was relatively simple and could be easily breached if it was built outside. Yang Fan suddenly had an idea and moved the barbican inside the stockade. With this barbican, the entrance to the stockade was extremely narrow. It was difficult for the enemy to launch a large-scale attack, and the guards on top of the barbican could look down from above and kill a large number of enemies. With Yang Fan's guidance, the stockade was gradually changed. Although it looked strange, it gradually had a murderous aura of being armed to the teeth. In the eyes of a true military commander, these measures of Yang Fan could only be considered half-baked. However, in the eyes of these simple mountain people, Yang Fan was simply the reincarnation of a military god who could turn iron into gold. Who would have thought that with just some stones, wood, and sand, after some simple modifications, the originally weak stockade could have such great destructive and defensive power? Sun Er's small hands were behind her back as she inspected the stockade that was slowly changing. She did not say anything, but when she looked at Yang Fan, her eyes were already shining with red hearts. The reinforcement and modification of the stockade wall was the most important thing. By dusk, the general shape of the wall had already been formed. However, although the barbican that Yang Fan had designed could not be any simpler and could probably be destroyed after 2 battles or a heavy rainstorm, it still could not be built in one go. They had to burn the midnight oil to complete it before the enemy arrived. "Miss, be careful." Yang Fan was pointing at the stockade gate when he suddenly saw a girl carrying a bucket trip over a piece of dirt that had fallen on the ground during the construction of the barbican. Her body fell forward and she almost fell to the ground. The water in the basket splashed onto her shoulder. Seeing this, Yang Fan quickly stepped forward and reached out to grab her arm. Yang Fan had clearly grabbed the girl's sleeve, but who knew that he would grab empty air? Yang Fan was startled, but his movements did not have the slightest hesitation. He quickly stepped forward and grabbed the water basket on her shoulder. "Thank you, I'm fine." The girl smiled at him, then quickly hid her eyes and thanked him in a low voice. Her complexion was not very good. Her face was pale and gray, and there was not a trace of blood on her lips. She looked especially haggard. Yang Fan saw that her appearance was somewhat familiar. He looked carefully and suddenly remembered. He could not help but shout, "Ah, it's you." It turned out that this was the girl who carried the water basket on her back to feed him. That day she was in high spirits. Her flushed cheeks were like the sunset on the horizon, and her bashful eyes were like the rippling river. But today, the water from the basket had soaked her clothes, and dark red blood slowly seeped out of her shoulder. Lianxin, what's wrong?" A girl carrying a bucket of water outside the stockade gate saw this scene and quickly rushed over. Water jumped out of the water basket on her shoulder and splashed onto the ground. "Lianxin." The girl supported her. Lianqin pursed her lips and forced a smile. She said in a low voice, "I'm fine. Hurry and go. Store more water." She broke free from the girl's hand and hurried away. It seemed that she did not want to stand in front of Yang Fan for too long. Yang Fan looked at the girl who had just arrived. It was the girl who had poured water for Gao Qingshan in the hall earlier. Yang Fan asked, "Miss, when I saw her a few days ago, Miss Lianqin was fine. What happened to her?" The girl's eyes turned red when she heard this. She knew that the large changes in the stockade were all because of Yang Fan. This person was different from the people in Yaozhou. Even though they came from the same place, they were completely different people. So she did not hide it from him. The girl choked with sobs and said, "A few days ago, chieftain, when soldiers charged into our stockade and killed and burned everywhere. I was hidden by my father in the pile of firewood behind the millstone and was so scared that I did not dare to go out. I saw an animal chasing Lianqin and tearing at her clothes. Lianqin resisted with all her might, but her arm was chopped off by him. That animal—" Her tears suddenly poured out like a spring. Lianqin had already fainted from the pain, but that animal still did not let her go. He tore off Lianqin's clothes and raped her. She picked up her sleeve and wiped the corner of her eyes. She said with hatred, "I heard people call him Little Headman, and there were also people who called him Xia Chuan Feng. I will never forget him in my life. We must get revenge for this." Xia Chuan Feng. Yang Fan slightly narrowed his eyes, and a sharp light shot out of them. "He is one of Chief Din Wen's men? I will remember this. Tell Miss Lianqin that I will use that person's blood to repay the favor of carrying water." The girl raised her teary eyes and looked at him with some surprise. Gao Qingshan walked with heavy steps to him and said to the girl, "Tell Lianqin to stop carrying water. Her body is still weak, so look after her." The girl agreed and chased after Lianqin. Gao Qingshan gazed at their receding silhouettes. His deep voice rumbled like thunder in his chest. "I've already asked around. That Xie guy has a headman, Zhen. That's why he's a little headman. He's working in the marshal governor's office and has an official position. He's a military officer of the lower 8th rank." Yang Fan knew what the headman, Zhen, meant. The big headman, or the second headman, had an affair with a woman from a commoner's family, but did not take her as a wife or concubine. This woman married a commoner, but because the child's father was the headman, also known as the headman Zhen, he would become a little headman. Yang Fan said word by word, "I guarantee that he will die." For a beautiful woman in the prime of her youth to suddenly have one of her arms chopped off and her pure body defiled, it was a great pain. Yang Fan had always hated the people in the censorate for their heartless deeds, but he had never hated them as much as he did now. It was a kind of pain that cut into his skin. It was as if Miss Lianqin was his own flesh and blood. Gao Qingshan withdrew his gaze and looked back at him. He said in a deep voice, "This person's life is mine." Yang Fan did not argue with him and only asked, "Who else does this girl have in her family?" Gao Qingshan's thick black eyebrows slightly rose. He asked, "What is it?" Yang Fan said, "If she has no relatives in the stronghold, after the situation in Yaozhou has calmed down, perhaps I can take her to Luoyang." Gao Qingshan's bright eyes stared at him. He said in a deep voice, "You want to marry her?" Yang Fan said, "I already have a wife." The corner of Gao Qingshan's mouth slightly curled up. There was a hint of mockery in his voice. "She does not need sympathy. Everyone in the stronghold will take care of her." Yang Fan said in a low voice, "Perhaps a change of environment will be better for her." Gao Qingshan was a little confused. He thought about it for a moment before he understood. He lightly replied, "Although our ancestors were also Chinese, we are not as stupid as you. It is not her fault that she was humiliated. No one would dare to use this reason to humiliate her, especially men, because we did not protect women well. The ones who should feel humiliated are us men." He suddenly turned around. After taking 2 steps, he suddenly turned back. His eyes were bright. "I am very grateful for your good intentions, but I will say it again. That Xia fellow's life is mine." Yang Fan frowned and said to Gao Qingshan, "It may not be difficult for me to kill him, but it will not be easy." "I know." Gao Qingshan raised his head high and said in a deep voice, "But this is my responsibility, because I am her blood brother." Gao Qingshan walked away with large strides. Yang Fan looked at his back that was as heavy as a mountain. After a long time, he turned to look at the barbican that was still under construction. He had spent a lot of effort to build this stronghold into a fortress because he knew that this was a guarantee for the peace talks to proceed. If something happened to the 1,000+ people in the White River stronghold, it would anger the White Brute tribe. If something happened to Sun Er, the door to negotiations would be completely closed. He did this for his own safety, because if Huang Jingrong dared to deny that he was the imperial envoy, then Huang Jingrong would not hesitate to kill him. But right now, Yang Fan simply wanted to build this stronghold into a killing machine. It was not for the success of the negotiations, nor was it to ensure his own safety. It was simply because he wanted to kill. He had an impulse to kill. Chapter 5:27. The villagers worked through the night, and all sorts of simple and crude fortifications were finally completed by midnight. Although these fortifications were simple and crude, made of earth, wood, sand, and stone, they could not be preserved for long and could not withstand the trampling of a few battles. The mountain people who had built them with their own hands knew how useful they could be. It could reduce the number of casualties on one's own side by more than 1-fold, and at the very least, cause more than 2 times the damage to the side attacking the stronghold. With these simple fortifications, even if more than 1/3 of the defending personnel were to be reduced, the remaining personnel would still be able to play a greater role than the original defensive strength. The fortifications this time were simple and crude, so their sturdiness and destructive power would be greatly affected. However, after learning how to build and use these things, they could slowly transform their village into a mountain city that could not be invaded. The people in the village were simple and straightforward, so Yang Fan's abilities easily won their respect. Yang Fan had also used his actions to win the trust of the mountain people. They believed that this imperial envoy was on their side. Yang Fan could now move about as he pleased in the village. No one was following behind him to keep an eye on him. Those who saw him would respectfully make way for him and bow. Yang Fan only went to sleep after midnight. He did not sleep for long, only about 6 hours. When he woke up, the sky was dark. There were no tools to measure time in the village, and there was no sun in the sky, so he did not know what time it was. Because it was a dark day, a thick fog covered the forest and the village. Looking down from the top of the village, one could not see a single person after 300 feet. Even if one could see people within 100 feet, they would still be indistinct. From the looks of it, there will probably be a heavy rain in the afternoon. They won't come, will they? Sun Er appeared out of nowhere and lay next to Yang Fan. She stuck her head out and looked down the mountain. She was still wearing that unfashionable armor. It was as simple and unadorned as a terracotta warrior that had been dug out from the ground. However, this terracotta warrior was alive, beautiful, and filled with the vitality of youth. There was no powder on her face, but her skin was as smooth and white as jade. There were few droplets of water on her cheeks. She had probably just washed her face. Bright red lips, neat white teeth like those of a rhinoceros. Yang Fan could also notice that she had 2 faint dimples on her cheeks. Although they were a little lighter than his, they looked much cuter than him. Yang Fan looked appreciatively at the little beauty in military attire, then cast his gaze down the mountain and said, "That's hard to say. Let us wait and see. If he will send a messenger, it will be all right. Otherwise, even if the heavens were to rain knives, he would still come. He would send an army, because as long as I am alive, he will not be at ease." Sun Er tilted her head and thought for a moment. She furrowed her thin, curved brows that were like mountains in the distance. She came to a sudden realization and said, "Originally, I was quite grateful for your help to the stronghold. But now that you mention it, it seems that if you weren't here, I wouldn't have suffered such a serious blow. Doesn't that mean this disaster was caused by you?" Of course. Yang Fan refused to admit that he was a jinx. He immediately denied it. "You can't say that. When they sent their troops, they didn't know I was on the mountain. Besides, you were the one who pushed me out, otherwise." Yang Fan was just about to lay out a few more pieces of evidence to prove his innocence when a sharp cry suddenly came from the fog. Yang Fan's expression tightened. He hurriedly crouched on the bunker and looked down the mountain. He said in a low voice, "I'm afraid they're here." Sun Er also crouched beside him. She stretched her slender white neck and opened her almond-shaped eyes wide. Unfortunately, the fog was so thick that she couldn't see anything. After a while, the cries came closer. The cries were very fast, and the syllables were very strange. Yang Fan couldn't understand them. Sun Er said in surprise, "It's a cry for help." It seems to be people from the barbarian tribe." Before she could finish speaking, many indistinct figures appeared in the fog. They were running in the direction of the stronghold. After running for a short distance, they cried out in pain and fell to the ground. Gao Qingshan stood up from the wall of the stronghold. He covered his mouth and shouted down the mountain in the same strange language. It seemed that he was telling the people at the foot of the mountain that there are caltrops scattered on the slope and telling them to run along the mountain path. Sure enough, the people at the foot of the mountain quickly gathered and ran along the mountain path. The mountain path was not a straight one, but a winding path along the mountain. However, the grass on both sides was covered with caltrops. Although the pursuers seemed to be getting closer and closer, they could only run along the winding mountain path. Some of them had already been injured by the caltrops. They had to be supported by others as they limped and ran with great difficulty. At this time, the shadows of many tall horses appeared in the fog behind them. The pursuers were chasing very quickly, so the speed at which they fell off their horses was also fast enough. The horses stepped on the caltrops, and the caltrops pricked their legs. The horses neighed and jumped in pain. The riders couldn't sit still, and all fell off their horses. As a result, they sat on the caltrops and cried out in pain. The people running in front were getting closer and closer. In the thin morning fog, Yang Fan could already see their faces clearly. Some of them were draped in tiger skins, sheepskins, and some wore strange, close-fitting robes. Their tanned arms and legs were bare, and they held forks, spears, and other weapons in their hands. Among them, knives were rarely seen. Even weapons like forks and spears were rarely made of iron. Most of them were ground animal bones, or made of hardwood. Yang Fan also discovered that there were many men and women among them. The number of women was at least several times that of men. The men held simple and crude hunting bows and led many children. Some of the men even carried babies in swaddling clothes on their backs and chests. They ran forward with all their might. Occasionally, they would hurriedly turn around and shoot an arrow. The light bamboo arrow flew into the white fog. It was unknown if it had hurt anyone. The ones at the back were women. They held wooden forks, bone spears, and other extremely primitive weapons, desperately trying to stop the pursuers. The pursuers had already discovered the strangeness of the hillside and began to gather their men and horses, chasing along the mountain path. The women at the back were constantly falling under the sharp sabers. The pursuers often broke their spears and died with their heads separated. However, the women were not afraid. They still tried their best to use their own lives to stop the pursuers, fighting for a chance of survival for the men and children. No one in the village cursed the shameless men who were running for their lives. They already knew that this tribe was the people of Cabron Village, which was more than 10 miles away from the White River Village. Cabron Village was a small tribe in the Black Man tribe. The culture of the entire Black Man tribe was uneven. They had a primitive social form all the way to a feudal society similar to the dynasties of the Central Plains. The white man tribe was more civilized than the black man tribe. There were also differences within the black man tribe. Some tribes were more advanced, while others were extremely primitive. The Cabron village was a tribe that was similar to a primitive society. This tribe lived in mountains, built nests in the trees, or used caves as houses. They used animal skins as clothes, or a special kind of tree bark as clothes. For some reason, there had always been more men and women in this tribe. The ratio of men to women was very different. Generally, only 5 to 10 women could have a husband. Therefore, the only thing their husbands did was to take care of their children. When the wives went out to hunt, pick, or look for food, the husbands would hold hunting bows to protect their homes and children from the invasion of wild animals. In a tribe like this, the affairs of the tribe were managed by the women. In a tribe like this, the social status of men and women was completely reversed. The more social rights you enjoyed, the more social obligations you had to bear. Naturally, things like fighting were the responsibility of women. For example, in the White River Village, once a war broke out, the warriors of the village would naturally charge at the front to protect their women, elders, and children. In a society that was dominated by women like Cabron, it was natural for the female warriors to protect the men, elders, and children. Yong Fan already knew that there were all kinds of strange tribes in the barbarian tribe. When he saw the men running in front and the women desperately covering for them, he could roughly guess what kind of existence this tribe had. But he still couldn't accept it. Seeing those women holding simple weapons being chopped to death by the fierce cavalrymen as if they were vegetables, he couldn't remain indifferent. Open the gate and let them in. Archers cover from both sides. Shoot when the pursuers get close. Yong Fan gave 2 orders without hesitation. Sin Er also acted as his messenger without hesitation. Sin Er had already gotten used to being his messenger for the whole day yesterday. Sin Er gave the order loudly and turned around to look. Yong Fan, who had been lying next to her, had disappeared. Sin Er was shocked. She suddenly stood up, looked around, and said to herself blankly, "Where is he?" The village gate had already been reinforced. There were many sharp wooden stakes that faced outwards, and they looked like 2 vertical boards. After receiving Sin Er's order, the villagers moved the wooden stakes at the top of the gate and pulled open the thick wooden gate that had been reinforced several times. They then let the fleeing people of the Cabron tribe in. The crying children, led by their fathers, escaped into the stronghold gate. There were at least a few hundred of them, and they were still rushing into the stronghold gate. Sin Er could not leave them to die, but she was afraid that the pursuers would take the opportunity to rush into the stronghold gate. Holding the scabbard, her palms were full of cold sweat. She did not care about the whereabouts of Yong Fan. Han Shuang, one house subordinates, was riding on a horse. He held a sharp saber in his hand and slashed left and right. One by one, the barbarian women were decapitated by his saber. Han Shuang was exhilarated by the killing. Seeing that the gate of the stronghold was only 10 feet away and the gate was still open, Han Shuang became even more excited. He raised his saber and shouted, "Kill our way into the stronghold!" As soon as he finished speaking, he pressed his legs against the horse's abdomen and stopped entangling with the barbarian women who were fighting and retreating at the same time. Instead, he charged straight towards the stronghold gate. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, the speed of the horse was extremely fast. The distance of more than 10 feet was covered in an instant. In front of him, the elderly and children were still staggering into the stronghold. Han Shuang was in a hurry to charge into the stronghold gate and did not notice that when the refugees reached the stronghold gate, they were like a stream of water that met a huge rock. They automatically flowed to the sides. Because the stream of people split and regrouped, Han Shuang did not notice anything strange until he was near. When Han Shuang was near, he realized that there was a person standing at the stronghold gate. The person stood there straight, like a sharp spear. He also held a spear in his hand. His right hand was behind his back, and the spear in his hand was placed diagonally behind him. The bald spear was white without tassels, and the spear's edge was like a sword. Chapter 5:28. Han Shuang urged his horse to gallop as fast as lightning. By the time he saw Yang Fan, the horse was already in front of Yang Fan. When Han Shuang saw Yang Fan, he did not rein in his horse. Instead, he kicked the pedal and sped up. At the same time, the saber in his right hand drew a dazzling arc toward Yang Fan's head. Unless Yang Fan's spear was made of iron, the spear would break and he would die if he borrowed the horse's momentum. Yang Fan stood like a spear at the gate of the fort. He watched as Han Shuang and his horse became one and charged toward him. In his hand was a long saber that glowed with a bloody light. As the saber rushed over, Yang Fan saw that it had already taken more than 10 lives. Yang Fan lowered his shoulders and took a step forward, standing in a bow stance. The spear came out from under his ribs like the tongue of a poisonous snake. When the tip of the spear was pointed at Han Shuang's chest, he was holding the spear with both hands. The back of the spear's shaft had a handle that was more than a foot long behind his elbows. Han Shuang could see his every movement clearly. His movements were standard, just like a young apprentice who was practicing meticulously according to his master's instructions. Han Shuang was puzzled. He could clearly see each of his movements. But why couldn't he avoid it? The sharp saber in his hand also missed. The long saber drew an arc until it formed a semicircle. The spear pierced through the center of the semicircle. With a poof, Han Shuang was lifted into the air by a strong force and crashed into a rider on his left. The rider was half a horse's length away from him. When Han Shuang flew into the air, he crashed into him, knocking him off his horse and into a thicket of caltrops. The man rolled a few times in the thicket. His body was pierced with caltrops, but he did not let out a scream. Han Shuang felt that she had broken the man's neck, so the man was lucky that he did not feel any pain. Then Han Shuang realized that he had crashed into the right side with a whoosh. This time, he flew into the thicket with the man he had collided with. He heard the man scream, and it was the last sound he heard in the world. His chest had been pierced by a spear, and after being shaken by Yang Fan, his chest had expanded into a bull-sized hole, and blood was flowing out of the hole. The great spear Yang Fan was holding was taken from Gao Qingshan. This great spear was the weapon used by the previous chief of the He Bai stronghold. The long spear was thick and heavy, with bamboo as the handle and fine steel as the blade. The deep grooves of the spear were dripping with dark red blood, causing people to shiver. "Kill!" Yang Fan shouted in a deep voice. He swung his great spear towards the incoming cavalrymen. Pick, stab, smash, hack, point, poke, sweep. Every time he picked a person, every time he stabbed a person, every time he smashed a person, every time he swept 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 a person, every time the spear swept a person, every time the spear tip broke through the air, emitting a chi-chi sound. The chi-chi sound of breaking through the air was continuous, as if someone was forcefully tearing apart a piece of linen cloth that would never end. Following this chi-chi sound, the pursuing cavalrymen were thrown off their horses as they wailed in pain. The cavalry that were charging at him were actually stopped by his spear, unable to advance any further. The grass on both sides of the road was filled with thickets, so the pursuing cavalrymen could only charge at him on the road. As a result, each row could only have 3 cavalrymen closing in on him. But it didn't matter if the 3 of them were wielding spears or knives, stabbing or chopping. No matter how well coordinated they were, the great spear in Yang Fan's hand was like a flood dragon coming out of the water. He was always one step ahead of them, and was able to drill into their attack net, causing them to be thrown off their horses. Yang Fan held his long spear as he walked on the ground. With his own strength, he was actually able to block the incoming tide of cavalrymen, preventing them from advancing any further. One man holding the pass 10,000 cannot pass." The people in the stronghold were all dumbfounded. Most of them had practiced a few martial arts techniques, but none of them had this kind of martial arts. Stepping down from his bamboo spear, he was able to block the pursuing cavalrymen by himself. In a short moment, he had pierced more than 10 cavalrymen onto their horses, and not a single one of them was his match. This great Zhou imperial envoy actually had such good martial arts. Lady Sun-Er stood on the stronghold and tightly grasped her scabbard. She was so excited that her pretty face was flushed red. Her pair of almond-shaped eyes stared at Yang Fan's movements. Her hands were also eager to try. Following each of Yang Fan's movements, her muscles tightened and then relaxed. It was as if she was the one making the moves. She was completely mesmerized by Yang Fan's heroic appearance. "Zhao Zilong has been reborn. Zhao Zilong has been reborn," Lady Sun-Er muttered. Very quickly, this sentence resonated with everyone in the stronghold. For them, the only famous general of the Central Plains that they were most familiar with was the Kingdom of Shu during the Three Kingdoms period. Among the famous generals of the Kingdom of Shu, the number one in spear techniques was none other than Zhao Zilong of Changshan. At this moment, in their eyes, Yang Fan was like the reborn of Zhao Zilong. Fighting on foot and using a spear to single-handedly face the endless charge of cavalrymen was not an easy task. Just like how some people could not understand how a small bird could make a large hole in the hard outer shell of an airplane. Only those who had truly fought with a charging warrior on a fast horse would know just how great the force produced when a person borrowed the momentum of a horse to charge forward. When a fast horse was charging, the edge of the blade only needed to be dragged. Without using any strength, one could easily cut a person's neck. There is no need to be like an executioner, concentrating all the strength in their body to wield a demon-headed blade. A spear that was as thick as the mouth of a bull could pierce through the body of a charging person, but at the same time it would be smashed into two by the huge counterforce. But Yang Fan was standing on the ground alone with a spear. As long as he collided with the spear, his spear would be smashed and he would be sent flying backwards, nailing into the wooden wedge of the stronghold gate. But Yang Fan had already killed 13 cavalrymen. He was still alive, and he was still charging forward. Yang Fan used the swallow and spit spear. The bloody tip of the spear entered and exited a cavalryman's chest. Immediately after, he used the pear blossom swaying head to sweep the two people who were charging at him to his left and right into the thistles. Even though the horse had lost its owner, it did not slow down. Yang Fan took the opportunity to turn around. Seeing that the last few female warriors of the Cabron tribe were about to retreat into the stronghold, he immediately shouted, "Close the stronghold gate!" Gao Qingshan seemed to have woken up from a dream. He quickly ordered, "Quick! Close the stronghold gate!" Sun-Er anxiously said, "We can't close the gate. He hasn't come back yet." Gao Qingshan said, "Miss, if the gate is not closed, the cavalrymen will not be able to escape. They will take the opportunity to attack into the stronghold." At this time, the people at the stronghold gate had already slammed the gate shut. They also used wooden stakes as thick as a battering ram to block the gate. Yang Fan's spear was like a swimming dragon. Pa, pa, pa! He swept 3 people off their horses. Suddenly, he turned around and rushed down the stronghold wall. He also held the spear in his hands horizontally. The spear in his hands was more than 20 feet long. Looking at his movements, it seemed that he wanted to use the spear as a pole to jump up the stronghold wall. The stronghold wall was originally only 15 feet tall. After he used the wooden stakes to increase the height, it was less than 30 feet tall. As long as the spear did not break, he could jump up. Gao Qingshan, who was on the stronghold, did not know that Yang Fan had this kind of plan. After explaining to Sun-Er, he grabbed a rope and swung it a few times in the air. With a loud roar, he threw it towards Yang Fan and shouted, "Catch him!" Yang Fan was about to use the spear as a pole to jump up the stronghold wall. As soon as he saw the rope being thrown towards him, he immediately stretched out his hand and grabbed it. Gao Qingshan held the rope tightly and shouted. His feet seemed to be rooted to the ground as he stood firmly. Yang Fan grabbed the rope with one hand and ran forward a few steps. Dang, 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 he actually ran up the stronghold wall. When he reached a height of about 10 feet, his momentum was exhausted. He then used his strength to pull the rope, intending to use the force to jump up. As the cavalry approached, they saw that this person was about to jump up the stronghold wall. The spear in their hands flew out and whistled towards him. Do, do, do! 3 spears in a row were nailed into the soil and wooden pillars. One of the spears stuck close to the front of Yang Fan's clothes and stuck into the gap between the soil and stones. The tip of the spear scraped against the soil and stones, and sparks flew. The people on top of the stronghold wall were terrified. Sun Er hurriedly shouted, "Release the arrows!" A rain of arrows shot towards the approaching cavalry and temporarily suppressed them. Yang Fan was also worried that it would be difficult to dodge the arrows in the air, so he actually pulled the rope with one hand and ran horizontally across the stronghold wall. With Yang Fan running like this, Gao Qingshan could not hold on any longer. A few strong-looking stockade bandits beside him saw that he was being dragged forward by the rope. They hurriedly dropped their weapons and pounced on him to hold him tightly. 6 or 7 people held the rope tightly, not allowing it to move even an inch. Yang Fan felt that the rope had been secured, and his legs kicked even harder. Dang, 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 he ran up the stronghold wall. The tip of his foot touched the wooden pillar of the stronghold wall, and his body rose into the air. In midair, he turned around and threw the spear in his hand. The spear was thrown out by him, and with a flash, a mist of blood appeared from the chest of the cavalry, who was charging at the front. The spear went through the chest and did not lose momentum. The cavalry behind him was caught off guard and was pierced through the chest again. He fell off his horse along with the spear. Only then did Yang Fan land steadily on the ground. Under the stronghold wall, a dozen or so masterless horses were patrolling on the ground and did not dare to run around. There were corpses on the ground, and many people with broken bones and torn tendons were lying among the thistles. They cried out in pain, but did not dare to move recklessly in case they were pricked by the thistles. Seeing how powerful Yang Fan's attack was, a tsunami of cheers came from the stronghold wall. Actually, Yang Fan looked like he was in a limitless state, but it was extremely dangerous just now, and he was now exhausted. He was not dealing with an opponent who was fighting on the spot, but an enemy who was charging at him at lightning speed. Every time he stabbed an enemy or was cut down by an enemy's weapon, his arms had to bear a huge amount of force. Even if he used a clever method to reduce the force, his hands were already trembling slightly from using too much force. "Shoot! Throw the spear!" Gao Qingshan gave the order, while the enemy's spirit was being suppressed by Yang Fan. Bamboo arrows and spears were thrown down, and some of the enemies who were caught off guard were shot. They had no choice but to retreat and escape to a safe distance. After a while, the infantry behind caught up and used their big shields as cover to block the bamboo arrows and began to clean up the thistles. Seeing this, Gao Qingshan immediately ordered people to use the simple catapults. Stones the size of fists were thrown out, and the stronghold was filled with ghostly cries and wolf howls. Many people were smashed until their heads were bleeding and they fell to the ground moaning. Those who were not injured ran away, and the cleanup operation collapsed again. After a while, the shield bearers came back. They formed a team of 2 with a big shield in front of them and a small shield in front of them. They blocked the stones that were smashed on the shields and cleared the thistles bit by bit. The real attack and defense battle had begun. Chapter 5:29. Seeing that the bamboo arrows and stone projectiles were no longer a threat to the enemy clearing the battlefield, Gao Qingshan tested the direction of the wind and then ordered people to light the poisonous smoke bombs mixed with spicy herbs. They threw them out one by one, and the thick smoke quickly filled the entire hillside. Because there were many caltrops on the hillside, the soldiers in charge of clearing the area had to be careful of the caltrops under their feet, so they moved slowly. At the same time, they had to hold up their shields to block spears, arrows, and flying rocks. After the poisonous smoke was ignited, they wept, sneezed, and coughed incessantly. Looking at the situation, it would be dark by the time they cleared the hillside and could use it as a battlefield. At that time, who knew how many of them would lose their ability to fight because of the poisonous smoke? The people in the stronghold had never fought such an easy battle before. Even though the enemy would reach the base of the stronghold sooner or later, the indigenous weapons and methods they used were actually able to cause so much trouble for the enemy without harming a single person on their side. This greatly boosted their confidence. Right now, they were only using long-range weapons to attack and harass the enemy, but after toiling for a day and a half, they had armed the entire stronghold. When the enemy reached the base of the stronghold, they would let the enemy have a taste of even more powerful toys. The Kuman tribesmen who had escaped into the stronghold were settled down, and those who were injured were treated and bandaged. Their chief was a woman in her early 40s, and her body was as sturdy as a man in his prime. Sun Er asked her about what had happened in the Kuman language, and then said to Yang Fan, "The Wuman and my by man joined forces to fight against the soldiers. They originally lived in the forest by the river, but because their tribe was too small and adjacent to Yunchuan's tribe, they were worried that they would be attacked. They wanted to take advantage of the night to migrate to a larger tribe, but when they passed by here early in the morning, they happened to bump into the soldiers attacking the stronghold." The female chief bowed to Yang Fan and mumbled something before taking off a necklace made of pure white animal teeth and looking at Yang Fan with a smile. Sun Er smiled and she said that she admired your bravery and was even more grateful for your selfless help to their tribe. As the ghost lord of the Kuman tribe, she gave this wolf-tooth necklace to you. The Kuman of the 13 caves of Yao province will treat you as their best friend from now on. After saying that, Sun Er explained, Ghost Lord means leader. Yang Fan did not quite understand the significance of this bone and wolf fang necklace, nor did he plan to become a half-savage in the future. He only treated this necklace as an ordinary gift and accepted it with both hands with a smile. The Dryan tribal chief looked very happy to see him receiving the Xianglian. He said a few more words to Sun Er. Sun Er nodded her head and solemnly replied. She then pulled Yang Fan towards the village wall and said to Yang Fan, she said that although their weapons are simple and crude, their archery skills are very good. Now that she has received our selfless help, she will send all of her soldiers to defend the stronghold with us. I agree. The two of them walked up the wall and saw the battered and exhausted appearance of the invading Yaozhou soldiers in the thick smoke. Sun Er beamed with joy and said to Yang Fan, "Hey, I couldn't tell that these methods of yours were so useful." Yang Fan stared at the foot of the mountain, but there was no relaxed expression on his face. As he observed the situation of the enemy, he said, "From their weapons and equipment, the invading enemy should be the native soldiers of Yaozhou. Huang Jingrong did not send a messenger to see me, nor did he dare to send reinforcements from Rongzhou and Feng Prefecture. It seems that he has hardened his heart to let me die here. I'll protect you." Yang Fan looked at her in astonishment. Sun Er stuck out her tongue and said with some embarrassment, "I'm saying that after our stronghold was rebuilt under your guidance, it won't be easy for them to attack. As long as we can endure for 2 days, my father's reinforcements will arrive. They won't be able to do anything to you." Yang Fan smiled and looked down the mountain again. He muttered, "I hope so." Sun Er saw the beads of sweat on Yang Fan's temples. Without thinking, she took out a handkerchief from her waist and stood on her tiptoes to gently wipe it away for him. Her movements were incomparably natural. Before Yang Fan's temples were even touched, he could smell a faint fragrance. He seemed to have smelled this scent on Wan and Xiaoman's bodies before. It was the body fragrance of a woman. Following this, She gently wiped his temples with the handkerchief. Yang Fan looked at her in surprise. Sun Er gave him a bashful smile. Her white and rosy cheeks were as beautiful as a blooming camellia. The catapults made of bamboo were indeed easily damaged. In just a short while, 2 had been damaged. However, these things were easy to make. They could be used immediately after pulling out 2 large stalks of bamboo. Gao Qingshan had just ordered people to replace 2 catapults when he turned around and happened to see the scene on the stronghold walls. A stockade guard who was patrolling to the side moved closer and whispered, "Stockade head, I heard from the people who came with Miss Sun Er that the chieftain has already decided to marry Miss Sun Er to the great ghost lord, Jeju." Gao Qingshan glared at him fiercely and reprimanded, "Are you the only one with eyes? Are you the only one with ears? I think you have nothing better to do. Go do something." In the forest, countless people and horses were hidden by the lush trees. The forest was so vast that it was hard to tell how big it was. For these barbarian warriors who had lived on this land for generations, there were many places in the depths of the forest that they were completely unfamiliar with. They had never set foot in before. This was the first time they had entered such a place. Snakes, insects, ants, and rats lurked in the forest. Even if they applied the most effective medicine, they could not completely avoid their bites. The local people would use all kinds of methods to protect themselves. In addition, they had been bitten by the mosquitoes and insects on this land since they were young and had long gotten used to their venom. That was why they could still live in this forest. If it was the soldiers sent by the imperial court, they would only need to stay in this forest for 2 days before a large number of non-combat casualties would occur and they would collapse without a fight. This was the best protection that the heavens had given to humans living in the forest. However, even if they could survive here, it was easy to imagine the hardships of life. There was too little food to feed so many people. The chieftains and headmen also found it difficult to adapt to the vile environment here. In the depths of the forest, there was an open space where cow dung, horse dung, and mosquito-repellent herbs were constantly being burned. The smell of smoke was used to drive away the snakes, rats, mosquitoes, and flies. The smell was not very good, but at least it made the environment much cleaner. Under a tent that emitted a faint stench of smoke, the 2 chieftains, Finchi and Meng Zhizhu, as well as 7 or 8 headmen, quietly sat there. The atmosphere in the tent was somewhat oppressive. After listening to the report of the situation from the person who had rushed over from the White River stronghold, Finchi silently waved his hand and had him withdraw. Finchi let out a long sigh of relief and placed his hands on his knees. He looked at the somewhat downcast headman and then cast an inquiring glance at Meng Zhizhu. He said, "Wenhao has gone to attack the White River stronghold. It seems that he has borrowed the help of the imperial court soldiers. He will not be satisfied until he completely occupies our territory and our people." Meng Zhizhu's expression was somewhat gloomy. He slightly narrowed his eyes and said, "We cannot delay in the forest for too long. Everyone has eaten wild vegetables, plucked wild fruits, hunted wild beasts, and even eaten all the rats. If we continue to waste time, we will collapse without a fight. However, even if we return to the stronghold, there is not a single stronghold that can support so many soldiers. The only way is if we scatter, but if we do that, we will definitely be defeated one by one." A big-headed man angrily said, "Originally, we were unwilling to return to the stronghold because our greatest concern was that we would give them an excuse to attack our stronghold and harm our families. Now, it seems that our worries were completely unnecessary. Wenhao has already steeled his heart to annex our stronghold." Another big-headed man said, "The worst thing is that our soldiers are all the strong laborers of the stronghold. If we fight for too long, it will affect the autumn harvest and livestock. Our people will not be able to live, and at that time the morale of the army will definitely fall. Now that they are closing in on us, step by step, we have nowhere to retreat to." The big-headed man at the side hesitated for a moment and said hesitantly, "Perhaps we can ask them for peace? If we hand over all the refugees that Huang Jingrong wants, he will have no excuse to act against us. There is no need for us to throw away the lives of our entire clansmen for the sake of those refugees." Another headman was also somewhat moved and quietly agreed. "That's right. Isn't there an imperial envoy in the White River stronghold? Perhaps through him we can have a good discussion with the imperial court." Xuanqi's second housekeeper, Long Fei, immediately glared at them fiercely and said, "That imperial envoy is all alone, and even he himself is trapped on the mountain. What's the use of discussing with him?" Long Fei's daughter-in-law was a refugee. She was already pregnant and was about to give birth to a good grandson for him. Asking him to hand over the people? He would rather die than do it. Xuanqi seemed to not have heard this suggestion. He continued to stare at Meng Zhizhu and said in a deep voice, "Since our two clans have formed an alliance, this old man wants to know what Chieftain Zhizhu plans on doing." Meng Zhizhu said, "I really thought that the imperial court's army of 100,000 had already reached Yaozhou. Our army was scattered and would be easily annihilated, so we could only retreat in panic and gather our troops. However, I didn't expect Huang Jingrong to be bluffing. The great Zhou army that came as reinforcements only has a total of 10,000 people, while we have 70,000 warriors, which is more than enough to deal with them. However, the imperial court will definitely send reinforcements. If we want to fight, we must finish it quickly. I think that we should attack back and besiege Yaozhou city again. However, we cannot annihilate the imperial court's reinforcements. That will completely anger the imperial court, and there will be no room for maneuver. Yaozhou city needs to be surrounded and forced to retreat. Then we can directly attack Wenhao's nest. Only by killing Wenhao and Yunxian until they have no power to retaliate can Yaozhou be at peace. Only then will there be a possibility of negotiation. As for Wenhao and Yunxian's people, the imperial court will not care no matter how many we kill. I'm afraid that they will be looking forward to us killing each other. Wenhao and Yunxian, those two idiots, are pulling the tiger's tail and acting as our saviors." Xuanqi said in a deep voice, "Then what about the White River stronghold? My daughter, your bride, is still there." Chapter 530. Meng Zhizhu said with a serious expression, "We will send a group of people to White River stronghold to help her. The main force can only go to Yao State. As long as we take Yao State, White River stronghold will naturally be safe. If we delay any longer, our entire tribe may fall into an even greater danger." Meng Zhizhu turned to Sun Qi and said sincerely, "I like Sun Er very much. For her, I can give up my life. But now is not the time to show off my bravery. I am the leader of the tribe, and I have to be responsible for the entire tribe. If anything happens to Sun Er, as her man, I will use Yun Hao and Wenxian's heads to pay for her life." Sun Qi laughed loudly and said, "Well said. This is how a competent chieftain should be." Sun Qi slowly stood up and sternly looked at the leaders. He said in a deep voice, "Wenhao and Yunxian are after our territory and our people. That corrupt official Huang Jingrong is even greedier than a jackal. When he was in Yao State, he asked me for a life-sized golden Buddha statue. What do you think we will get if we surrender now? Do you think they will agree to negotiate with us if we do not satisfy their appetite? Forbearance will not bring us peace, and will only make it harder for their greed and ambition to be satisfied. You can't cut a fish's wool. We have nothing to talk about with corrupt officials like Huang Jingrong, and there is even less to talk about with arrogant people like Wenhao and Yunxian. I, Sun Qi, have to be responsible for the land my ancestors left behind and the people who raised me on this land. Sun Er is my most beloved daughter and also Chieftain Zhizhu's wife. But for our territory and people, I can only disregard her safety. Chieftain Zhizhu is also willing to give up this opportunity. Together with Chieftain Zhizhu, I will lead you back to Yao State City. We will beat them until they feel pain and fear, and they will no longer dare to see us as lambs that can be slaughtered at will. In this battle, we must be like time, advancing without retreating. How many people will cower in fear and negotiate peace? Sun Chi pulled out the scabbard and slashed down with his blade. A corner of the wooden table in front of him was cut off. Meng Zhizhu also stood up. His figure was tall and mighty, and when he stood up, his head almost touched the ceiling. Meng Zhizhu gripped the hilt of his saber and shouted in a deep voice, "Immediately cut down trees and make ladders, battering rams, and other siege weapons. Collect poisons, quench arrowheads, and carve bamboo arrows. In this battle, you can only win and not lose." The big-headed people in the tent all knelt down on one knee and placed their hands on their chests. They said in unison, "We will follow chieftain's orders. We will advance and not retreat. We will win and not lose." The voice in the tent was magnificent. The patrolling soldiers in the distance seemed to have heard something and stopped to look at the tent. The horses tied outside the tent seemed to have sensed the solemn atmosphere in the voice of the chieftains and headmen. They all raised their heads and neighed. The leaders came out of their tents one after another, rushing back to their own camps with their blood boiling, preparing to launch a surprise attack on Yao State City. There were only two people left in the tent, Fin Chi and Meng Zhizhu. Kaori's seething anger disappeared, and he became calm and steady. After a while, he said in a low voice, "If we lose this battle, we won't even have the capital to negotiate with the imperial court. We can gamble with our own lives, but we can't gamble with the survival of our entire clan." "I understand." Meng Zhizhu walked to his side and looked out, shoulder to shoulder. There was a calmness on his face that did not match his boorish appearance. "From the day we became leaders, we no longer lived only for ourselves and our families. If we lose this battle, we can only ask for help from Nanzhao and Tufan." Kaori frowned and said, "I also plan to do so. However, if we lose, we better ask for help from Nanzhao first. Nanzhao King will ask for money from us, but he won't covet our territory. But Tufan is different. Once they rely on Tufan, they will be even worse than the Tang dynasty." Meng Zhizhu nodded his head heavily, spat out a mouthful of turbid air, and said, "We'll see how it goes. Let's finish this battle first." "Be careful." Yang Fan suddenly pounced forward and pressed Sun Er to the ground. A huge crossbow bolt that was like a spear whizzed past and brushed past Sun Er's body. The crossbow bolt that was as thick as a goose egg hit a wooden pillar, and the wooden pillar that was as thick as the rim of a bowl snapped in half. Wood splinters flew everywhere from the explosion. A strong wind blew against Sun Er's face, causing her to feel pain. Thinking about how she would have been pierced by that crossbow bolt if she had been just a moment slower, Sun Er's small face paled in fear. Huang Jingrong had personally rushed to He by stockade. Not only had he come, but Wen Hao and Yun Xian had also come. They hadn't brought the reinforcements from the imperial court that had rushed over from Yao State and Rongzhou, but they had borrowed the bed crossbows from them. How could the weak defenses of He by stockade withstand a single blow from these sharp weapons? Fortunately, the armed forces of Yao State were actually the private armies of Wen Hao and Yun Xian, the two chieftains. The imperial court had given them the titles of military governor and provincial governor, which was equivalent to giving local autonomy in terms of military and politics. The imperial court was not responsible for their weapons and equipment, and the heavy weapons that the imperial court had brought with them were very limited. There were a total of 12 bed crossbows, but only 3 had been lent to them, and the number of crossbow bolts given to them was also limited. Otherwise, He by stockade would have fallen a long time ago. Even so, these 3 bed crossbows still posed a huge threat to He by stockade, especially when Huang Jingrong had come with almost all of Wen Hao and Yun Xian's main forces. They had attacked the stockade day and night, and the defensive power of the stockade had grown weaker by the day just from the attrition of the soldiers. A day ago, the Smoky Period chieftain had suddenly sent over a reinforcement army of about 1,500 people. Logically speaking, this number of soldiers should have been enough to help them break through the encirclement of the mountain and increase the defensive power of the stockade. However, after Huang Jingrong's attack had been thwarted, he had personally rushed over with his troops, just in time to meet this reinforcement army. The reinforcements had suffered heavy losses and could not charge in. Actually, it was also fortunate that they had not charged in. Otherwise, with so many soldiers trapped outside, if another 1,000 people charged in, the water supply on the mountain would immediately run out. In reality, there was already not enough water on the mountain, and the supply had already started to be limited. Fortunately, Huang Jingrong, Yun Hao, and the others did not know about the water shortage on the stockade, or else they would not have attacked the mountain so fiercely without any regard for the sacrifices. If they had surrounded the mountain for another 2 days, the stockade would have collapsed without a fight. The bed crossbows shot fiercely, suppressing the defenders on the stockade to the point where they could not even raise their heads. Then Wenhao and Yun Xian's soldiers attacked up the mountain like a swarm of ants. After the long-range shooting of arrows and stone bullets, it was time for the close combat. People continued to fall amidst the flashes of swords and blades. There were already many corpses lying on the half-collapsed walls of the stockade, and there was no time to clean them up. Some of the corpses had been left to dry for 2 or 3 days, and they gave off a nauseating stench from the scorching sun. War was cruel, and up until now, everyone had become numb to it. There were people around them who had lost their lives, but the people around them were indifferent. An arrow suddenly flew past and pierced through a person's throat. Yang Fan did not even look at him, and only pushed the person who was still breathing away. He rushed forward with his spear and blocked the hole that the person had left behind. The White River stockade was about to fall. Gao Qingshan used his steel knife to smash the brains of a soldier who had rushed up the wall. He panted and said to Yang Fan, "The chieftain must have met with some big trouble, or else he would have personally brought people to save us. Miss Sun Er is here. The chieftain will not ignore this." Yang Fan swung his great spear and knocked 2 soldiers off the wall, then said in a deep voice, "We don't have time to care about these things. The enemy might be able to resist this wave, but when they send another wave, I'm afraid this line of defense won't be able to hold. The second pass has been reinforced. After this battle, we will take the initiative to retreat to the second line of defense and continue to defend." Gao Qingshan gritted his teeth and said, "The women and children have been reinforcing and building day and night at the back. There is no way they can come up with any new tricks. After defeating this wave of enemies, we will retreat." This fierce battle lasted for more than 2 hours. Yang Fan and the rest were gradually unable to hold on any longer. Suddenly, there was a dang, dang, dang sound from the bottom of the mountain. When Hao had sounded the gongs to retreat, the ear-piercing sound of the gongs was like the sound of nature to the ears of both sides. The soldiers retreated like the tide, and the people in the stockade immediately relaxed. After the tension had passed, they felt that the last bit of strength in their bodies had been sucked away. Many people immediately collapsed to the ground. They did not care about the corpses of their companions and enemies under their bodies. They did not care about the bleeding wounds on their bodies. They did not want to do anything except lie down for a while longer. Women, old people, and children rushed to the top of the stockade wall. They fed them water and bandaged their wounds. Even children who were only a few years old could now skillfully bandage people's wounds. Yang Fan's current image was not much better than the others. He looked like a dirty beggar with unkempt hair. Because of the lack of sleep, his eyes were bloodshot. Miss Sun Er was no longer beautiful. Her beautiful, crescent moon-shaped headdress had long since disappeared. Her fluffy hair was like a chicken's nest, gray and dusty. Her originally white and delicate face had been blackened by the soot. Her clothes were so wrinkled that their original color could not be seen. There were also many black and red blood stains on them. As soon as the soldiers who attacked the stockade retreated, she fell down like the men who were guarding the stockade wall. She lay on her back, not at all ladylike. "Hey, your posture doesn't look good. Close your legs." Yang Fan was tired and weak, but he still had the leisure to teach Sun Er how to be a ladylike woman. Other people probably did not care about Sun Er's current appearance, but Yang Fan, who came from a civilized world, could not accept it. Sun Er rolled her eyes at him and said weakly, "You really have time to spare." Although she said this, she still obediently closed her legs. Her legs did not seem to belong to her anymore. When she closed them, her thighs and tendons ached. Sun Er's little face was as red as the kitchen god's. This was caused by the sudden change in the direction of the wind in the morning. As a result, her eyes were now as red as a little rabbit's. Yang Fan was silent for a while and sighed. "Tell me, what will happen if I go down the mountain now? Will they let the people in the stockade go?" Sun Er said lazily, "All right, aren't you tired of trying?" He has a guilty conscience. The one surnamed Huang will not let anyone in the stockade live to reveal that he killed the imperial envoy. Do you think I don't understand this? I won't stab you in the back. Yang Fan sighed again and said, "But I'm worried that Brother Qing Shan won't think this way. Look at him whispering to those people. Does he have a plan?" Chapter 531. What? Sun Er couldn't care less about her exhaustion. She crawled up and followed Yang Fan's gaze. Sure enough, she saw Gao Qingshan sitting under a half-collapsed wooden shed. Beside him, a stockade chief was helping him bandage the wound on his arm. There were a few other stockade chiefs around him. Gao Qingshan was whispering something to them, and as they listened, they instinctively glanced in Yang Fan's direction. The situation was indeed a little strange. Sun Er was furious and whispered, "How dare he? That idiot! If he dares to betray his friends, I'll chop off his head first." At this moment, Gao Qingshan had finished bandaging his wound. He stood up and walked towards them. The few stockade chiefs followed closely behind him. Yang Fan slowly sat up and shifted the position of his saber. Sun Er immediately stood up and looked at Gao Qingshan with an unfriendly gaze. Gao Qingshan didn't notice Sun Er's gaze and walked straight towards Yang Fan. He smiled and said, "Brother Yang." Yang Fan slowly stood up and said, "What's wrong?" Gao Qingshan said, "I plan to withdraw the people in the stockade to the second line of defense and continue to defend it. But it's hard to predict how long this line of defense can hold out. So I'm thinking." Sun Er couldn't help but blurt out, "What do you want?" As she spoke, she also placed her hand on the hilt of her saber. Gao Qingshan said, "I'm thinking to let Brother Yang protect Miss and leave first. Behind this stockade is a steep and unscalable mountain, and on both sides are cliffs. There were once witch doctors who tied ropes to the top to gather herbs. Although they've never reached the surface from there, according to them, the cliff on the right is not particularly dangerous. If the length of the rope is enough, we should be able to go down from there." So, Yang Fan was stunned. When the battle ended, he noticed that Gao Qingshan was looking at him with a thoughtful gaze. Later, when he was bandaging his wounds, he whispered to a few stockade chiefs and occasionally glanced in Yang Fan's direction. It was as if he had a plan. His first reaction was that Gao Qingshan wanted to harm him. Although this stockade was in one house sites, the current situation had turned into a situation where they would not rest until one of them was dead. This was all because of his existence. He was also an outsider, so he naturally thought that Gao Qingshan had ill intentions towards him. But he did not expect Yang Fan's face was burning hot, and he felt somewhat ashamed. He had been in the officialdom for a long time, and he was used to seeing people abandon their companions for the sake of their own interests without hesitation. And they even said that it was for the sake of the overall situation, and that it was for the sake of a strong man to relieve his own wrists. Unexpectedly, he used this kind of dirty mentality to speculate about these men whose hearts were as broad as the mountains and clouds. Sun Er heaved a sigh of relief and glanced at Yang Fan complacently. "I'm not leaving. If something happens to the stronghold, I'll only care about running for my life. Would I still be worthy of being the daughter of a chieftain? However, Your plan is very good. Get someone to escort Brother Yang away. Father can defeat Wen Hao, but it is impossible for him to defeat the imperial court. In the end, we still have to live under the sky. We have to obtain the emperor's forgiveness and let the emperor know the grievances we have suffered. We cannot do this without Brother Yang's help. Gao Qingshan said resolutely, "No. Miss, you must leave. If anything happens to you, I, Gao Qingshan, will not be able to redeem myself, even if I die 100 times. He did not allow Sun Er to reject him again, and suddenly turned to Yang Fan. With a solemn expression, he said, "That person is called Xie Chuanfeng. Do you remember it?" Yang Fan said, "I remember." Gao Qingshan smiled in relief. "If I die, I will entrust this person to you." Yang Fan smiled faintly. "If I die and you live, then I will entrust Huang Jingrong to you." Gao Qingshan said, "That is the imperial envoy. It is impossible for me to even see his shadow, and I cannot kill him. So I can die, but you cannot." Sun Er asked doubtfully, "What are you two talking about?" Yang Fan said, "Since you can't do it, then don't be in a hurry to make arrangements for your funeral. Until the very last moment, I will not easily admit defeat. Let us first retreat to the second line of defense." Gao Qingshan was just about to open his mouth when Yang Fan said with a smile, "It is easy for you to want to kidnap me down the mountain. But to want to kidnap me down the cliff, that is not an easy matter." Sun Er blinked her eyes and asked again, "What are you two talking about?" The two men looked at each other and smiled. Neither said anything. Sun Er pouted her small mouth and did not say anything else. "Why are we retreating?" Huang Jingrong charged into Wen Hao's tent with a face full of anger and questioned sternly. He was standing on the tree tower and was elated to see that the stronghold was about to be breached when Yun Hao suddenly sounded the gongs to retreat. His beautiful dream of burying Yang Fan on this mountain was once again shattered. Huang Jingrong was about to go crazy from anger. Inside the tent, Wen Hao and Yun Xian seemed to have just had an argument. Both of their expressions were somewhat gloomy. Huang Jingrong's eyes were full of anger. He looked at Wen Hao and then at Yun Xian and shouted, "Answer me." Wen Hao sighed and said lazily, "The soldiers are extremely tired. How can they continue to fight?" Huang Jingrong was furious. He waved his sheathed long sword and roared, "No matter how tired we are, can we be more tired than the people in the stronghold?" They even used the women, the elderly, and the children to charge up the stronghold walls as soldiers. Is that a stronghold wall? It has already collapsed into a mound of earth. As long as we put in a little more effort, we will be able to take it down immediately. Wen Hao secretly cursed, "Bullshit! It turns out that the people who died are not your people. You are using my people to pave the way for the stronghold. With every step forward, countless corpses will be left behind. When we take down the stronghold, how heavy will my casualties be? At that time, what will I use to fight with the other chieftains?" Huang Jingrong saw that he had a helpless expression but did not say anything. He angrily said, "Continue fighting. We must continue fighting. It won't be long before we can take down this stronghold." Wen Hao said, "My soldiers are extremely tired. If we are going to fight, we should switch to Chieftain Yun soldiers." When Yun Xian heard this, he said with a displeased expression, "Chieftain Wen, it was my men who took the lead this morning. My men suffered heavy casualties and have not recovered even now. You can't fight now, but do you think I can? What a joke! My soldiers are not as strong as yours." Wen Hao immediately said, "Since that's the case, I think we should surround the stronghold and not attack. Immediately call someone back to the city to borrow a few more ballistae from the reinforcements from the court. I think that those things are very powerful. If 10 ballistae fire at the same time, this stronghold will immediately be destroyed, and we can easily take it down." Huang Jingrong flew into a rage. "Trash! All of you are trash! All of you are overcautious and narrow-minded trash. Do you really think I don't know what you are planning? Let me tell you, if Yang Fan does not die, I will be finished and you will be finished. If Yang Fan interferes and the court's troops retreat, do you think Kun Chi and Meng Zhizhu will let you go? Wan Hao twisted his mouth and said, It's not the first time we've fallen out with them. So what if we can't beat them? They want to swallow us, but they don't have the strength. So that's what you think. Huang Jingrong began to run around the tent like a mad dog. After running for a while, he stopped and stomped his feet as he cursed. What happened to your ambitions? Are you willing to be dogs in front of Kun Chi and Meng Zhizhu for the rest of your lives? Anyone who wants to achieve great things has to make sacrifices. You too, short-sighted. Io. Before Huang Jingrong could finish cursing, someone suddenly nudged him, causing him to stumble and almost fall to the ground. Huang Jingrong looked over and saw a person run in a panic. The person knelt on one knee and said to Wen Hao, Governor, Yao Province has fallen. What? Wen Hao and Yun Xian were shocked. Huang Jingrong didn't care about cursing anymore. He pounced forward and tightly grabbed the person's collar. What did you say? How could Yao Province city fall? There are troops from the court there. How could it fall? Who are you? Where did you get this information? You. Huang Jingrong's string of questions made the person not know how to answer. Huang Jingrong was asking questions when he suddenly felt his collar tighten, making it hard for him to breathe. His hands unconsciously loosened and he was flung to the side. Looking closely, he saw that it was Wan Hao who was in a hurry. He could no longer care about his status as an imperial envoy and pulled on his collar to throw him to the side. Wan Hao glared at the person and said, Xia Chuan Feng, speak clearly. Who attacked Yao Province? How did it fall? Yun Xian, who was at the side, said so fast. Sun Qi and Zhizhu shouldn't have such great power. Could it be that they moved troops to Nanjiao? As it turned out, that person was Xia Chuanfeng. Judging from his handsome appearance, he wasn't someone who could be compared to a lowly person. Who would have thought that he would be so cruel and lascivious? He was willing to use his saber on a young girl, and he was even willing to use it on a woman who had fainted from the pain of her severed arm and was lying in a pool of blood. Xia Chuanfeng heard Yun Xian's words and revealed a smile that was uglier than crying. Reporting to Chieftain Yun, Nanjiao didn't send troops. The ones attacking the city were Sun Qi and Meng Zhizhu. Wen Hao was furious. How is that possible? How could they take Yao Province City so quickly? Are the soldiers of the court made of paper? Xia Chuanfeng sobbed. The two chieftains brought troops to attack the White River stronghold, so there weren't many defenders in the city. Sun Qi and Meng Zhizhu had people in the city. When they attacked the city from the outside, they immediately set fire to create chaos and help take the city gates. When the defenders saw that the two chieftains weren't there, they immediately abandoned the city and fled. By the time the soldiers of the court heard the news and rushed over to help defend the city was already surrounded by Wu and white barbarian soldiers. When they saw this, the soldiers were afraid that their own troops would be trapped in the city and broke out from the east. This lowly one was working in the military governor's office and received the news the last. Those bastards escaped faster than rabbits, and no one came to the residence to inform me. This lowly one almost became their captive. After Xia Chuanfeng finished complaining, he expressed his loyalty. This lowly one escaped the city and quickly came to deliver the news to the two chieftains. Meng Zhizhu led his troops to chase after the soldiers of the court. Chieftain Sun Qi led the white barbarians here. If the two chieftains don't leave now, they'll be trapped here forever. Wen Hao kicked the babbling Xia Chuanfeng to the side and roared, Retreat! Retreat immediately! Retreat to cloud-gathering stronghold, quickly! Huang Jingrong rushed in front of him and raised a finger. As long as there's another battle, Yang Fan must die. Wen Hao laughed sinisterly. If he doesn't die, the court will only believe his words? If that's the case, what use are you, Imperial Censor Huang? Humph. If you want to fight, then fight. If I don't leave now, I'll be buried here with all my warriors. Retreat. Retreat immediately. Chapter 532. Yang Fan dragged his tired body to the hut where he was hung up when he first arrived at the stronghold. He sat down on a pile of grass. Just as he took a breath, the one-armed Miss Lianqin brought him a pancake and put down the water basket on her shoulder. She said to him with some embarrassment, "There's not much water left." The water basket was very light. Yang Fan felt it as soon as it was put on the ground. Looking at Miss Lianqin's chapped lips, Yang Fan's voice became very gentle. "I'm not thirsty. You and Miss Sun Air can share the remaining water in the basket." "No, no, no." Lianqin hurriedly shook her head. "This is for you and Miss Sun Air. You are fighting at the front and need it more than me. I mean, I've already drunk it." At this time, Sun Air and Gao Qingshan exchanged a few words and walked in. Yang Fan grabbed the water basket and handed it to her, saying, "Here, you and Lianqin can share it. Quickly finish eating and rest. The next wave of attacks should not take too long." Lianqin refused and was dragged to sit down by Sun Air. Yang Fan took a hard bite of the pancake. The oatmeal pancake was actually quite fragrant. Normally, without any dishes, Yang Fan could happily swallow a few pancakes. But now his throat was smoking and the pancake could not melt in his mouth. When he swallowed hard, his throat felt like it was being cut by a knife. Sun Air took a wooden bowl and poured the water in the basket into the bowl. There was only half a bowl of water. Lianqin was a little uneasy and whispered, "I'll go get some more." Sun Air sighed, saying, "Forget it. The entire stronghold is short of water. If we drink more, others will have to drink less." Lianqin said, "But you are a chieftain and Brother Yang is an imperial envoy. It's not the same." Sun Air said, "What's the difference? Come, you drink 1/3 first. I'll share the rest with Brother Yang." Lianqin hurriedly refused again. Yang Fan said, "Lianqin, you are injured and need water more than we do. Don't refuse. If you don't drink your share, Sun Air will not drink." Lian Xan had no choice but to take small sips of water. She drank a little of the water in the bowl and passed it to Sun Air. Sun Air also took 3 small sips and passed the bowl to Yang Fan. Yang Fan did not refuse. He held the bowl and took a sip, feeling the sweet water flow slowly down his throat. Every cell in his body seemed to sigh with joy. People who were not extremely thirsty would never be able to experience this kind of taste. After tasting it for a long time, Yang Fan took another sip. He could not bear to swallow it immediately. With the water in his mouth, he handed the bowl to Sun Air. How could Sun Air take it? The 3 of them were pushing each other for a small bowl of water. Gao Qingshan was like a bull whose but was on fire. Brother Yang, they retreated, ha ha ha." Gao Qingshan grabbed Yang Fan's shoulders and shook him so hard that the water in the bowl spilled out and splashed all over Yang Fan. Lianqin was anxious. He hit his brother's shoulder and said, "Brother, be careful, the water is spilled." What did you say?" Lianqin's fist stopped in the air. He suddenly realized something. Sun Air, who was struggling to swallow the baked wheat cake, also looked at Gao Qingshan in shock. Gao Qingshan beamed and said, "When how retreated?" "They retreated." Sun Air and Lianqin rushed over and asked, "Is it true?" Yang Fan gently put the bowl to the side and suppressed the joy in his heart. He asked in a low voice, "Are you sure? Could they have used some kind of deceitful tactic?" Gao Qingshan laughed and said, "We are on the mountain, and they are at the foot of the mountain. Looking down from above, we can see everything. What is the use of them pretending to retreat? Who can they fool? Haha, they really retreated. How is it possible? Why would they retreat for no reason?" Yang Fan muttered to himself, but there was a smile on his face. Wen Hao and Yun Xian had hurriedly retreated. They didn't even have time to tear down the large tents that the generals were living in. The direction they retreated in was not Yao State City, but the wilderness. They fled downstream along the great river. There was a suspension bridge a dozen or so li downstream, but that road did not lead to Yao State. A few clever men were sent down the mountain to scout around. After confirming that they had really retreated, they immediately sent someone up the mountain to send a message. At the same time, they sent 2 people to follow the direction of Wen Hao and the others. After hearing the news, Yang Fan, Gao Qingshan, and Sun Er hurriedly went down the mountain. They walked around Wen Hao's encampment twice and saw that it was a mess. There were many things that they did not have time to take away. It could be seen that they had left in a hurry. As the 3 of them analyzed the reason for Wen Hao's retreat, dust billowed in the distance like a long dragon. The momentum was so great that they could feel it standing at the foot of the mountain. However, the people in charge of the lookout on the tree halfway up the mountain did not send out any warning signals. Just as they were surprised, a person in charge of guarding the perimeter ran back and shouted from afar, "The chieftain is here! Our chieftain is here with his troops." Sun Er was overjoyed and immediately rushed over to that person. Yang Fan and Gao Qingshan looked at each other and followed behind Sun Er. "Where is that bastard Wen Hao?" "What? He escaped." "Long Fei, take some people and chase after him." Xuanqi ordered in a thunderous voice. He ordered the second housekeeper, Long Fei, to lead the vanguard in pursuit. He also ordered one of his sons to quickly ride to the rear to urge the troops to chase after Wen Hao. He then jumped down from his horse and quickly walked over to Sun Er. Xuanqi pulled his daughter into his embrace and hugged her tightly. He then let her go and looked her up and down. Seeing that his beautiful daughter now looked like a little beggar, he couldn't help but say sadly, "My poor daughter! She was actually bullied to this extent by that bastard Wen Hao." Sun Er rolled her eyes at him and said, "Father, what nonsense are you saying? What do you mean your daughter was bullied to this extent by Wen Hao?" Gao Qingshan rushed to Xuanqi's side and bowed respectfully. "Gao, Qingshan greets chieftain." Xuanqi glanced at him, and then his gaze locked onto Yang Fan. After examining him for a while, his gaze became sharp. "He is." Sun Er wiped away the tears at the corner of her eyes and said to Xuanqi, "Father, he is called Yang Fan and is an imperial envoy sent by the imperial court. He is not on the same side as that imperial censor Huang. When I sent people to ask for reinforcements, I mentioned him. He can help us." Xuanqi sneered, and a hint of mockery appeared at the corner of his mouth. He said, "He can help us? Right now I have helped him. If I didn't come, he probably wouldn't even be able to keep his life. Humph. That imperial envoy Huang has mobilized troops from 3 provinces and has Wen Hao and Yun Xian listening to his orders. What does he have as an imperial envoy?" Sun Er furrowed her brows and said unhappily, "Father, how can you say that? Big Brother Yang, Imperial Envoy Yang, is very powerful. How can that fellow surnamed Huang compare?" Yang Fan smiled and stopped her. He took a step forward and cupped his hands at Xuanqi. "Yang Fan greets, Chieftain Xuanqi. Chieftain is right. Huang Jingrong has the support of Chieftains Wen Hao and Yun Xian. But what if Chieftain Xuanqi and Chieftain Zhizhu are willing to support me? My power will naturally be greater than Huang Jingrong's, won't it? As for the reinforcements from 3 provinces sent by the imperial court," Yang Fan shook his head and said confidently, "They have only been deceived by Huang Jingrong. Right now, they don't know that I am here. If they knew, I would tell them to watch from the sidelines and not interfere in the affairs of the provinces. They would definitely listen." Xuanqi laughed loudly. "Forget it. This old man doesn't trust you anymore. Now that you are not here, haven't the soldiers of the imperial court and that Huang Jingrong been forced to flee by me? Since you have helped this old man guard the stronghold, this old man will let you go. Otherwise, I will not let a single person from the imperial court go. If it weren't for you, how could Wen Hao and Yun Xian have such ambitions and drag Yao Prefecture into the chaos of war? Yang Fan said, Wen Hao and Yun Xian have ambitions. Even without Huang Jingrong's arrival, they would still find an opportunity in the future. Chieftain Xuanqi is trying to pin the blame on the imperial court for this matter. You've won now, but what do you think this momentary victory means? You once chased Wen Hao out of Yao Prefecture. When the army of the imperial court arrived, you quickly retreated back to your territory. Now that you are attacking Yao Prefecture again, what will you do when the imperial court's army returns? To put it bluntly, Chieftain Xuanqi, you can defeat Wen Hao and Yun Xian and chase away the few soldiers from the imperial court that have come to reinforce you. However, if the imperial court truly sends an army, you won't be able to withstand a single blow. Xuanqi was infuriated. With a clang, he pulled out the scabbard and said sternly, You have to test the sharpness of this old man's steel blade. Sun Er panicked and quickly moved in front of Yang Fan. She spread out her arms to protect him and angrily said, Father! You have just arrived and you are already going crazy. This is an imperial envoy of the imperial court. If you kill an imperial envoy, it will confirm your name as a rebel. Xuanqi angrily said, Damned girl, you are siding with an outsider. Move aside. What's wrong with an imperial envoy? Huang Jingrong is also an imperial envoy, but hasn't he been forced to flee by me? If he had left a moment later, I would have cut him down. Sun Er said, Brother Yang is different from Huang Jingrong. Xuanqi said, What is the difference? He is our friend. Miss Sun Er, let me say it. Yang Fan placed his hand on Miss Sun Er's shoulder. The women of the barbarian tribes were not as strict as those of the Central Plains. This was not the first time that Miss Sun Er's body had been touched by a man. However, when Yang Fan's warm and powerful hand pressed down on her shoulder, the heat from his palm seeped into her, and Sun Er's body became slightly weak. Yang Fan gently pushed her to the side and took a step forward. Facing the pole in Kuan Chi's hand that could cut through iron as if it were mud, he calmly said, Chieftain Kuan Chi has won a battle and seems to have forgotten himself. In your eyes, the army of the imperial court is only SOSO, right? Ha ha! Chieftain Darren should remember what your stronghold was like in the past. With just this stronghold, how many troops can it block? A few days ago, you sent a group of troops to help the stronghold, but they were defeated by Wen Hao. When they returned, they should have told you just how many troops were attacking the stronghold. And this stronghold, before you arrived, had always been in our hands. Wen Hao attacked the stronghold day and night, but he could not do anything to us. Why are we able to defend the stronghold? The warriors in the stronghold are not afraid of death and dare to fight. On the other hand, it is because I have made some changes to the stronghold, and my ability to lead troops in battle is not worth mentioning among the generals of the imperial court. Do you think you can easily defeat the imperial court's troops? Who knows if it is because the imperial court's troops do not want to help the tribes in Yaozhou. Otherwise, with over 10,000 elite troops, Chieftain Darren will have a hard time. If Chieftain Darren does not stop while you are ahead, and the imperial court sends more troops, how will you deal with it? Chapter 5:33. Xuanqi sneered. If I lead my clansmen to retreat to the forest, even if the imperial court sends 1,000,000 soldiers, can they do anything to me? Yang Fan said they can't. Xuanqi smiled proudly. Yang Fan continued. However, the imperial court has no intention of annexing your territory or seizing your hereditary position. Why are you doing this? Don't tell me it's fun to retreat into the jungle and become a half-savage? Yang Fan tilted his head and looked at Kaori's neck. With a serious expression, he said, There are a few large lumps on Chieftain's neck. The lumps are like hills, and the color is bright red. It seems that the mosquitoes in this forest are quite poisonous. Sun Er covered her mouth and wanted to laugh. Xuanqi was unable to restrain his anger at Yang Fan's teasing. Like an angry baboon, he flew into a rage and said, Nonsense! You have no intention of annexing my territory or seizing my position. Your people are doing this right now. No, no, no. Yang Fan raised his index finger and shook it elegantly. The people who want to annex your territory are Wen Hao and Yun Xian, although they are the governor and provincial governor of Yao province. You know very well that they're not people of the imperial court. As for the 3 soldiers who came as reinforcements, they were deceived by Huang Jingrong, and I am going to help you expose his lies. Sin Er looked at Yang Fan in fascination. Although his hair was as messy as a bird's nest, his face was streaked with black and white, and his body was covered in mud and blood. Even his shaking finger was dirty. He still stood there looking calm and elegant. Who among her clansmen had such an elegant demeanor? Yang Fan said, "That is why I find it very strange that as the leader of your clan, Chieftain Xuanqi, who is known for his wisdom, would not use such a good opportunity and would rather take a path of no return. Do you know that by doing this you will be playing into the hands of Huang Jingrong and Wen Hao, allowing their evil plan to succeed?" Kaori suddenly calmed down and glared at Yang Fan. "I have no choice but to fight this battle. Now we've lost many people. As a chieftain, I must give them an explanation. We can't just leave things as they are. Huang Jingrong, the main culprit, must die. Can you do that?" Yang Fan smiled and said, "We agree on this point." Xuanqi's expression softened a little as he said, "Wen Hao and Yun Xian offended their superiors and must be punished. Otherwise, if the other chieftains learn from them in the future, there will never be a day of peace in Yao province." Yang Fan blinked his eyes and asked, "Then how does Chieftain Xuanqi plan to punish them?" Xuanqi rudely waved his hand and said, "This is a matter between the tribes of our Yao province. It has nothing to do with the imperial court. There's no need for you to ask." Yang Fan said, "His Majesty the Emperor is very magnanimous. As long as you all acknowledge the existence of the imperial court and accept its rule, His Majesty the Emperor will not interfere with you at all. So as long as it is a matter between the tribes of Yao province, the imperial court will naturally not interfere. However, Wen Hao and Yun Xian are both appointed governors and provincial governors by the imperial court. If you make a move against them and the imperial court ignores it, where will the dignity of the imperial court go?" Xuanqi glared and angrily said, "So you're saying that you want to protect them?" Yang Fan said, "Although they are officials of the imperial court, since they cannot maintain the peace of Yao province and instead cause so many troubles, I think they can no longer be officials. If Chieftain Xuanqi wants to settle the score with your own people, he should wait until the imperial court removes them from their positions." Xuanqi coldly said, "The imperial court will remove them from their positions." Yang Fan said, "Huang Jingrong's memorial accusing you of treason should already be in the hands of the emperor." Xuanqi's expression tightened. Yang Fan continued, "Although I have always been in this stronghold, it does not mean that I am alone. The memorial accusing Huang Jingrong of her crimes and Wen Hao and Yun Xuan's ambitions should already be in front of the emperor. Does Chieftain Xuanqi think that the imperial court will protect a greedy criminal official and 2 ambitious chieftains, or will they be more willing to support someone like you who is loyal to the imperial court?" The anger on Chieftain Xuanqi's face miraculously disappeared. He sheathed his blade and rushed forward to give Yang Fan a big hug. He laughed heartily and said, "Recognizing a poisonous thing is the same as finding a good medicine. Not only has this old man recognized Wen Hao and Yun Xian, these 2 poisonous bastards, but I have also obtained Imperial Envoy Yang, a good medicine that can save the world and the people. This is this old man's good fortune." Yang Fan was stunned. Xuanqi's change was too fast, and he was unable to adapt. Chieftain Xuanqi loosened his embrace and enthusiastically grasped Yang Fan's hand. With a sincere smile, he said, "This old man represents the white barbarian tribe and is willing to accept Imperial Envoy Yang's help and mediation. Please believe me, the dark barbarian tribe will definitely agree." Yang Fan stammered, "Chieftain, sir, Imperial envoy, you are treating me like an outsider. Xuanqi solemnly said, the Imperial envoy is helping my people protect the stronghold and is willing to uphold justice for this old man. You are our best friend. You can directly call this old man by his name, or this old man will take advantage of your age and call me uncle. He took off the scabbard embedded with gems from his waist and placed it in Yang Fan's hands. His face had an abnormally sincere and passionate smile as he loudly said, this sword is something that this old man always carries with him. Today, I give it to you as proof of our friendship. Uncle Xuanqi, you agree to cooperate with me? Of course I agree. Xuanqi grabbed Yang Fan's shoulder and loudly said, let's go. Let's go up the mountain. Tonight, I want to hold a large banquet to reward the brave warriors of the stronghold. I also want to drink a few cups of good wine with my tribe's good friend, the esteemed Imperial envoy. Please. Xuanqi did not allow for any explanation. He pulled Yang Fan's hand and walked up the mountain. As Yang Fan walked, he suddenly felt that the old man beside him, who seemed to be abnormally hot-tempered, was actually not a big baboon that was easily angered, but a cunning old fox, and he himself was the little monkey that was playing a monkey show with the old man. Wu Zetian was playing with her two most beloved male pets at Lichuantai. She was lying on the bamboo couch of Xiang Fei, holding Zhang Yiji's hand in front of her chest and gently caressing it. She was smiling as she watched Zhang Chongzong change into who clothes and dance for her. Suddenly, the chief internal servant, eunuch Gao, hurried over and whispered a few words into her ear. Wu Zetian suddenly heard an urgent report from the southwest that Prime Minister Li Zhaoda was already waiting for her at Wuqing Hall. She couldn't help but be shocked. She didn't know what had happened. She quickly stopped the dance, changed into her robes, and hurried to Wuqing Hall. When Wu Zetian arrived at Wuqing Hall, the Chief Prime Minister Li Zhaoda and the Imperial Attendant Shanghai Wanner had already arrived. No need for formalities, Rise. Prime Minister, please sit. Wu Zetian couldn't be bothered to exchange pleasantries. The moment she entered Wuqing Hall, she excused the two of them from bowing to her. She hurriedly sat behind the imperial desk and asked in a deep voice, what exactly happened? Li Zhaoda solemnly said, Your Majesty, the censorate Huang Jingrong is investigating the Jianan Taoists. They are abusing their authority and slaughtering the innocent. For the sake of extortion and bribery, the barbarians of Yao province can't stand the humiliation and have revolted. What? Wu Zetian's face immediately turned gloomy. The Shanghai Wanner softly said, Yao province's white barbarians and Wu barbarians have led over 200,000 people in rebellion. The other tribes of Yao and Yan prefectures are restless. Tubo and Nanzhao have deployed their troops at the border. Their intentions are unclear. Wu Zetian's face turned even colder. When Wang Xiaojia recaptured the 4 garrisons of Anqi, the Tubo allied with the Turks and were defeated by Wang Xiaojia. News has come from the western regions that Wang Xiaojia has already recaptured Anqi. The biggest problem at hand is that after conquering the 4 garrisons of Anqi, he will have to station troops there. Based on a rough estimate, there should be at least 30,000 soldiers left to guard the 4 garrisons of Anqi. These 30,000 soldiers will be stationed at the border for a long period of time, and rations will be a huge problem. Transporting food from the mainland is a good idea, but the journey is long and the roads are treacherous. Every single buckets of rations transported will cost at least 5 buckets. Wang Xiaojia has already submitted a memorial to the imperial court to discuss the matter of stationing the army. After some discussion, the imperial court has agreed to his suggestion and decided to temporarily station him in Anqi. Although stationing the army will only provide less than half of the rations needed by the border army, and the rest will still have to be transported from the central plains, it is still better than relying solely on the imperial court. Even so, the Bureau of Revenue has done some calculations for the imperial court. With the sea trade gradually flourishing, the Silk Road trade is no longer as important as it was during the Han Dynasty. If the imperial court garrisoned the army in Anchi, the profits from opening up the Silk Road wouldn't even be comparable to the expenses of garrisoning the army in the 4 garrisons of Anchi. Thus, after the victory, voices of opposition to stationing the army in Anchi arose once more. Some officials even suggested withdrawing the army from Anchi, believing that this barren land isn't enough to guard. If one were to consider the economic accounts of the 4 garrisons, the losses outweighed the gains. On the other hand, from a political perspective, there aren't many benefits to be gained at the moment. In truth, whether the 4 garrisons of Anchi should be maintained or not was a dilemma with both pros and cons. There is no such thing as a perfect conclusion. If Jiannan were to fall into chaos at this moment, the voices of opposition to the abolition of the 4 garrisons of Anchi would spread like wildfire in the imperial court. And the restoration of the 4 garrisons of Anchi is the only military achievement of the Wuzhou dynasty. How could Wu Zetian bear to revoke it? Besides, if Jiannan were to fall into chaos, if the Tubo Empire were to make use of this opportunity to collude with the barbarians of Jiannan, the northwest and southwest would no longer be peaceful. This wouldn't just be a matter of the 4 garrisons of Anchi, but the entire great Zhou Empire. At this point, Wu Zetian angrily slammed the table and bellowed, "Huang Jingrong! How dare she fail to consider the bigger picture? She deserves death." Seeing that the eye drops were almost fully applied, one said, "Sage, this is the memorial that Huang Jingrong has just submitted to the imperial court regarding the rebellion in Yao province. Please take a look." Wu Zetian took the memorial and read through it carefully. Puzzled, she said, "The contents of Huang Jingrong's memorial doesn't seem to match what Minister Li has said." Shangguan Wan'er said, "Here is another memorial from the Inspector General Yang Fan. It has just been sent to the capital on horseback. Please take a look." Yang Fan's memorial was written by Zhang Jinji, and it also mentioned the rebellion of the barbarians of Yao province and the Wu barbarians. However, Huang Jingrong's memorial stated that the barbarians had colluded with the outlaws and plotted a rebellion. Due to Zhang Jinji's discovery, they had no choice but to bring forward the rebellion. On the other hand, Yang Fan's memorial pointed out that Huang Jingrong had indiscriminately slaughtered the innocent, accepted bribes, and forced the barbarians to rebel. After reading through it, Wu Zetian didn't know who she should believe. While this wasn't the time to pursue the matter, a different judgment would determine whether the imperial court would pacify or annihilate Jiannan. Military affairs were a matter of great importance to the empire, especially with the unsettled situation in the western regions. It would affect the southwest greatly, so how could Wu Zetian not be cautious? Chapter 534. Li Zhaoda stroked his long beard and said, "Once the situation in the southwest falls into chaos, it will become a huge threat to the empire. Now that the imperial court is sending troops to the western regions, we cannot push them too far. Otherwise, if the barbarians defect to Tubo or Nanzhao, the situation will become even more out of control. The southwest has always been a complicated place with many different races living together. Restraining them is the most suitable policy there. Thus, it is better to pacify them than to suppress them." According to Yang Fan's words, the barbarians rebelled because they were threatened and extorted. Thus, it is better to pacify them. I believe that as long as the culprit is punished, the resentment of the barbarians will be resolved. Your Majesty should issue a decree to punish Huang Jingrong and order the officials of Jiannan to pacify the situation. Wu Zetian glanced at Li Zhaoda and asked, "Chancellor Li is also stationed in the capital like me. How do you know that the situation in Jiannan is as Yang Fan said? If my judgment is wrong, and the barbarians are really plotting a rebellion, they might have already colluded with Tubo and Nanzhao. If the imperial court's troops are delayed, Wang Xiaojie's return route to the east will be cut off." Li Zhaoda said calmly, "The two of them have their reasons. It is difficult for me to distinguish right from wrong based on their memorials. However, if I look at the memorials from the officials of Jiannan, I believe that the truth will be clear." Wu Zetian was getting on in years, and her energy was waning. She no longer cared about the affairs of the empire. Ever since she had two handsome men, Zhang Changzong and Zhang Yiji, she indulged herself in pleasures and became even less concerned about the affairs of the empire. When Li Zhaoda mentioned the memorials from the officials of Jiannan, Wu Zetian had no recollection of it at all. She couldn't help but look at Shanghai Wanner. Shanghai Wanner said, "The memorials that Chancellor Li mentioned were sent to the capital a few days ago. The sage has already reviewed them. Wanner, take a look." Shangguan Wan'er searched for a while and found a few memorials to the throne. She handed them to Wu Zetian. The one at the top was from Zhang Genji, the provincial governor of Feng Province. In the memorial, Zhang Genji accused Huang Jingrong of extorting the local authorities, accepting bribes, and slaughtering the innocent. In order to obtain benefits, he accused the barbarian leaders of treason and threatened them in the name of the imperial court, forcing them to contribute their wealth. The memorials also mentioned that Huang Jingrong had detained the leaders of the barbarians and would only release them after receiving contributions. It also mentioned that the leaders of two small tribes had not made any contributions and had been accused of being accomplices in the rebellion and had been executed. In the end, Zhang Genji said in his memorial that the southwest barbarians were valiant and the common people worshipped martial arts. Huang Jingrong's actions had caused the tribes to be filled with resentment. If he did not issue an imperial edict to reprimand her and order her to repent, he feared that there would be unforeseen consequences. Seeing this, Wu Zetian suddenly had an impression. She had indeed seen such a memorial a few days ago, but she had not paid much attention to it at that time. Instead, she felt that Zhang Genji's words were overboard. She was the one who promoted Zhang Genji to the capital and made him the Renhuang of the Phoenix Pavilion. She didn't expect him to refuse her edicts. In a rage, Wu Zetian drove him out of the capital. Since then, she didn't have a good impression of him. In addition, the censor was responsible for supervising the officials. He stood on the opposite side of the officials and wasn't well liked. She didn't care about the censor's impeachment. The censor didn't care about the military and didn't govern the government. In her opinion, it wouldn't cause any harm. If the officials were to speak up for the censor, it would be really dangerous, especially since Zhang Genji was a local official and Huang Jingrong was the censor from the capital. Their positions were very different. As an official, Zhang Genji was concerned about the stability of the area under his jurisdiction and the interests of the local authorities. On the other hand, when the imperial court's officials left the capital, they were naturally in conflict with the local officials. With this in mind, Wu Zetian did not take Zhang Genji's words to heart. She only thought that he was bluffing to chase Huang Jingrong away. He did not want Huang Jingrong to cause trouble in his territory for him to clean up after. Now that she looked at Zhang Genji's memorial, Wu Zetian had a different opinion. Wu Zetian then looked at the other memorials. They were all memorials by Zhang Genji to impeach Huang Jingrong. Although the words were much milder than Zhang Genji's, the meaning was more or less the same. Moreover, Huang Jingrong was indeed a tyrant in Jiannan, and there were plenty of evidence that could be used against him. Most of these memorials were filled with examples, and the more Wu Zetian read, the angrier she became. She could not help but ask, "Who is the current Jiannan observer?" Li Zhaoda bowed and answered, "He is the supervising censor, Pei Huaigu." In the early days of the Tang dynasty, the imperial court would send out emissaries from time to supervise the various provinces and prefectures and counties. Their names were not fixed, such as the interviewing envoy, observing envoy, supervising envoy, inspecting envoy, or Jidushi observing and disposing envoy. Now that Pei Huaigu is the observer of Jiannan, he is equivalent to the highest ranking official in the province. Wu Zetian said, "Send an imperial edict to Pei Huaigu on a fast horse, ordering him to head to Yao province to appease the barbarians. On the day the edict arrives, Huang Jingrong is to be stripped of his position as the imperial envoy." Li Zhaoda stood up and said, "Yes, Your Majesty." The reason why Wu Zetian did not give this task to Yang Fan was because she had her own considerations. Firstly, Pei Huaigu is the highest-ranking official in Jiannan. The rebellion in Jiannan is part of his responsibility, and it is only natural for him to be in charge of it. Bypassing him and sending an official from the capital would require constant communication with the capital and the local officials. Moreover, the official from the capital is not familiar with the local situation, and it is hard to avoid trouble. On the other hand, Yang Fan is the patrol envoy of Zhu Daolu, and he is not only in charge of Jiannan. How long would it take for the rebellion of Jiannan Path to be pacified through negotiations? What were the follow-up developments and the series of aftermath after the rebellion was pacified? All of these would require a lot of time. It was impossible for Yang Fan to stay in Yao province to deal with this matter. This was especially so after what had happened. Wu Zetian hoped that, through his supervision, she could understand the situation of the other imperial censors. Furthermore, Yang Fan and Huang Jingrong are on opposing sides. While Wu Zetian is 80% convinced of Yang Fan's words, Huang Jingrong's words are not without reason. The censor reported that Zhu Daolu showed signs of rebellion and the imperial court sent people to investigate. Indeed, there was a rebellion there. Did this imperial envoy force the barbarians to rebel, or did the barbarians have the intention to rebel? Wu Zetian had some misgivings about this. If she let Huang Jingrong's archenemy investigate him, she would not be able to find out anything even if there were any questions. With these considerations, Wu Zetian decided to send another high-ranking official to quell the rebellion in Yaozhou. This was to ensure that she could find out the truth behind the barbarians' rebellion. Receiving the imperial edict, Li Zhaoda cupped his hands and left. Wu Zetian picked up Zhang Jinji's memorial and read it again. She said thoughtfully, "This man is capable. If he is loyal to me, he will be a useful person." Wanner said, "Zhang Jinji is over 70 years old and has passed the age of ruling the country. He is mature and experienced in handling matters. During Huang Jingrong's trip to the southwest, he was able to foresee that something bad would happen. As expected, he is an experienced and sincere person who plots for the country. If the sage wants to use him, just use him. Currently, only Minister Li is the sage's right-hand man in the court." Wu Zetian was moved. She thought for a moment and said, "Put him aside for now. When the matter in Jiannan is over, we will change him to another place and observe him." Wanner bowed and said, "Yes, Wanner will remember it. Brother Yang is back." A few white man girls who were cooking in the camp shouted when they saw several horses galloping over. One of them was Yang Fan. Sun Er, who was squatting and adding firewood to the stove, stood up and looked at the horses. Yang Fan galloped over on his horse. His head was wrapped in a white bun, and he was wearing a white button-down shirt. He was wearing a pair of wide blue trousers with a belt that dragged his beard. He was dressed like a white barbarian man. This white man attire not only made him handsome, confident, and in high spirits, but also gave Sun Er a sense of familiarity. As he came closer, Sun Er could clearly see the scabbard that her father gave him on his waist, as well as a small pouch embroidered with a picture of bees picking flowers on the other side of his waist. The small pouch bounced up and down on Yang Fan's body as he galloped on the horse. A sweet smile immediately appeared on Sun Er's face. Her dimples seemed to be filled with wine. That small pouch was sewn by her carefully. Originally, she was worried that Yang Fan would not accept it. Now that she saw that he really hung the pouch on his waist, her heart was naturally happy. Yang Fan, Gao Qingshan, and the others stopped their horses. Sun Er immediately went forward and held the reins of Yang Fan's horse. There were several knights beside her, but her eyes were only looking at Yang Fan. She asked with concern, "Brother Yang, how is the matter? Did they agree?" Yang Fan tilted his leg and jumped down from his horse. He smiled and said, "Do you think they like to fight? I have an imperial edict on me. They can't not believe it." After I explained the reason to them, they set up camp on the spot. They promised me that as long as you don't attack, They won't move a single soldier and will quietly wait for orders. Don't worry, Huang Jingrong's external help has been cut off. She is now a turtle in a jar. Yang Fan smiled and patted the neck of his horse. He then asked Sun Er, "Where are the two chieftains?" Hearing him mention Meng Zhizhu, the sweet smile on Sun Er's face disappeared. She replied in a low voice, "The mountain has sent people to surrender. They are currently receiving the envoy sent by Wen Hao." "Oh!" Yang Fan's expression changed. He said, "I'll go take a look." Yang Fan quickly rushed to Sun Qi's tent. Sun Er looked at his back and wanted to say something, but stopped. She hesitated and did not follow him in the end. Before Sun Er went to the White River stronghold, she knew that her father had betrothed her to Meng Zhizhu. At that time, she did not feel anything special. When a girl grew up, she would eventually have to marry someone. With her background and bloodline, the only path in the future was to marry to Nanzhao or Tubo to become a princess, or to become the wife of some influential person. Otherwise, she would become the wife of some chieftain or headman. Meng Zhizhu was actually a very good choice. His identity and status were very high. Wu Man was not like the royal families of Nanzhao and Tubo, who had so many rules to restrict her. Moreover, Meng Zhizhu was not very old. If he married another influential person, it was very likely that the other party would already be in their 50s or 60s. Most importantly, Meng Zhizhu was famous in all the large tribes in Yao Prefecture. He was a famous hero. Which girl did not love a hero? Sun Er had also heard of his name. Therefore, Sun Er did not have any objections to her father's decision. She was not particularly happy, but she was also not sad. But who would have thought that she would meet Yang Fan in the White River stronghold? In fact, she was very clear that she could not marry Yang Fan. She was a barbarian princess. It was impossible for her to become a concubine of a Han official. Her family would not agree, and Yang Fan had also never expressed his love for her. However, love did not know where it came from. It just happened. Sun Er deceived herself and enjoyed the feeling of secretly liking a man. She did not want to think about the result, nor did she want to think about separation. However, there were some things that she could not avoid. Looking at Yang Fan's back, her heart was empty, and she felt a sense of loss. Chapter 535. When Yang Fan arrived near Xuanqi's tent, he saw a few people being escorted out of the camp by the barbarian soldiers. Yang Fan glanced at them and confirmed from their clothes that they were people sent by the Wind tribe. He knew that the messengers had already left, so he was no longer in a hurry. He slowed down his pace and walked over slowly. The curtains of the tent were raised high. When Yang Fan walked in, he saw Xuanqi and Meng Zhizhu sitting behind a low table, discussing something in low voices. When they saw Yang Fan come in, the two of them hurriedly stood up and asked Yang Fan. They only relaxed when they learned that the imperial court's troops had already set up camp and were prepared to watch the battle between the four great tribes of Yao province. After Yang Fan finished explaining the situation of his mission, he asked, "I heard that when Hao and Yun Xian sent messengers? What do they want to talk about?" Xuanqi said they sent people to negotiate peace. They said that when Hao and Yun Xian are willing to compensate the black and white tribes with 500 mountain goats and 100 water buffaloes as compensation for their provocation and starting a war. At the same time, they will resign from their positions as the governor of Yao province and are willing to form an alliance of brothers with the black and white tribes. Yang Fan raised an eyebrow and said with a mocking smile, "Other than the 500 mountain goats and 100 buffaloes, the rest are all empty promises. They have to resign from their positions whether they want to or not. Do they think they can continue working if they don't ask to resign? As for forming an alliance of brothers, is there anything else? What did they say about Huang Jingrong?" Meng Zhizhu sneered. They actually want to protect Huang Jingrong. After all, they were the ones who organized this together. It doesn't matter if they suffer a small loss now. As long as they can protect Huang Jingrong, It's like they have a knife hanging over our heads. No one knows when it will cut down. Yongfan smiled. Since Chieftain Jeju has already seen through this, I presume that he will not agree to their demands. Xuanqi said in a low voice, That's right. We also put forward 2 demands. First, they have to be responsible for inviting the chieftains of Yao province to publicly apologize to the black and white tribes. Second, Huang Jingrong must die. Otherwise, there was no room for discussion. Either they hand over Huang Jingrong's head, or they hand her over. Meng Zhizhu stroked his chin and muttered, They definitely won't kill him. I'm worried that they won't even hand him over. If they defend the mountain and stubbornly delay us until the imperial court comes out to rescue us, relying on the principle of protecting the imperial envoy, regardless of whether this imperial envoy is guilty or not, whether he deserves to die or not, they can still obtain the imperial court's good graces. Yang Fan said, Therefore, we can negotiate, but the momentum of attacking the mountain must not be slowed down because of this. Instead, it must be strengthened. We need to force them to give in before the imperial court intervenes. Chieftains, please send people to chase after their messengers. Tell them that the imperial court's reinforcements have already maintained a neutral stance. They no longer have any outside help. If they do not surrender, there is no other way. Kaori asked, Are you certain that the imperial court will send people to mediate and not send more troops? Yang Fan said, Is 70% sure enough? Kaori was still thinking about it when Meng Zhizhu slammed the table and stood up. If there is a 50% chance, then it's worth it. I will go to the front of the mountain to supervise the battle. I just need to beat them until they feel pain. Beat them until they're blind and go to school. I won't admit defeat. Meng Zhizhu said. Then, like a bull, he rushed out with loud footsteps. The sounds of battle in front of the mountain shook the heavens, causing the windows of Wen Hao's old residence to tremble. Wen Hao was an official in Yao province, but it was impossible for his tribe to change their original way of life just because he became an official. They still lived in their own strongholds, farming, herding, and fishing. If things continued like this after a few generations, Wen Hao's family would become a real official's family. They would lose the influence they had over the tribes under their command, and those headmen who had been managing the villages for the Wen family for several generations would become the new masters of the villages. Feng Province's governor Luo Shu Dao was such an example, but the Wen clan had only been the governor of Yao Province for a little over 20 years. During this time they had been abolished several times, so their roots were still in the mountains and in the strongholds. They had not lost control of their tribe yet. This stronghold was the main stronghold of the Wen clan. It had a permanent population of 3,000 people, but now 20 to 30,000 people had moved in because it was a relatively large stronghold. The terrain was not dangerous. It was impossible for a large tribe with thousands of people to live in a place that was too dangerous because the living environment in such a place was too harsh. Under normal circumstances, a stronghold with a large population would have a stronger ability to protect itself, so there was no need to choose such a dangerous place. It was not common to be surrounded by tens of thousands of soldiers like this. No one would be prepared for danger in times of peace. In order to deal with this kind of large-scale war that only happened once every few hundred years, their entire clan would live in a remote place year after year, day after day. However, this point had now become the biggest weakness of the stronghold. If the terrain was not dangerous enough, they would not be able to take advantage of the terrain to build a sturdy defense. The enemy could attack from all directions. The lush forest around the stronghold had become the enemy's best cover and materials that could be used to attack the stronghold at any time. In such an environment, the warriors of the black barbarians and white barbarians who were used to fighting in the jungle were like fish in water. There was no intense scene of the usual offensive and defensive battles, where people were like ants surrounding each other. Even if there was a direct battle, it was only the Wen clansmen who controlled the narrow valley and fought with the white barbarians and black barbarians who attacked. As for the barbarian soldiers in the forest who launched sneak attacks, it was enough to make the entire stronghold feel like an enemy, but there was almost no way to deal with them. Attacks from the outside were fine, but food and drink for 30,000 people was a big problem, which stronghold would store so much military rations. Moreover, they had hurriedly fled back from the attack on the White River stronghold. They had barely brought a few days' worth of rations with them. Now, they completely relied on the stronghold to provide them. There was no solution to the rations problem, and the morale of the army was extremely slack. Previously, he had already retreated once at Yaozhou. Afterwards, he had borrowed the power of the court's reinforcements to fight his way back to Yaozhou. This time he had attacked the White River stronghold for a long time without success. In the end, he only heard that Yaozhou had fallen and that Xuanqi had chased after him, so he fled back to his stronghold. His power was originally inferior to the white barbarians and also inferior to the black barbarians. This gave everyone a feeling that the black and white barbarians were undefeatable. The soldiers were trapped in the stronghold. They didn't know if the black and white barbarians had split up to attack the strongholds that belonged to them. The soldiers who had rushed over from the stronghold were worried about their families. So how could they fight in peace? After a few days of fierce attacks, there had been a large number of casualties in the stronghold. Many people in the stronghold were related to him, so they often came over to cry for their sons, husbands, nephews, and second cousins. This caused Wenhao's heart to be in turmoil. These problems aside, more importantly, the tens of thousands of soldiers in the stronghold were not all his soldiers. At least a third of them were Yun Xian's men. Yun Xian had been full of ambition at the beginning, and Wenhao had only made up his mind because he had been bewitched by Yun Xian. Now, Yun Xian was the first to feel regret. It was his idea to repeatedly urge Wenhao to send an envoy down the mountain to negotiate for peace. So annoying! So annoying! Wenhao sighed heavily and paced back and forth in the hall. His face was dark, and the servants had long been scared away by him. No one dared to look for trouble at this time. "Governor Wen, our envoy has returned." The leaves of a fruit tree that was dotted with green oranges swayed as Yun Xian rushed over. The surroundings of the hall were filled with ornamental flowers and fruit trees. Yun Xian had ignored the path and had actually come directly under the fruit tree. It was clear that he was in a hurry. Wenhao raised his head and saw one of his trusted stewards that he had sent down the mountain hurriedly walk over from the gravel path. Ever since Huang Jingrong had arrived at the stronghold, he had lost his appetite for food and was not used to living. What pained him the most was that the treasures he had collected along the way and the delicate beauties had all been thrown away in Yao State City. He did not know which bastard had taken advantage of them. Now that Wu Man and Bai Man had surrounded the stronghold and said that they wanted to take his life, Huang Jingrong was so scared that he could not sit still. He had heard early in the morning that Wenhao had sent people down the mountain to negotiate for peace, but there had been no reply. Huang Jingrong could not sit still and hurriedly came to find Wenhao to ask for news. Wenhao did not mistreat him and still treated him as an honored guest when he arrived at the stronghold. He stayed in the back residence of Wenhao's home. After going around 2 small paths and passing through a thicket of fruit trees, he was about to reach the hall when he suddenly heard Wenhao's exasperated shout from behind the trees in front of him. "What? This is impossible. Absolutely impossible." Huang Jingrong hurriedly lightened his footsteps and quietly crept over. He stood behind a wall of trees and listened attentively. When he heard the contents of Wenhao and Yun Xian's discussion, Huang Jingrong could not help but be frightened out of his wits. Yang Fan, that scourge, had already stopped the reinforcements from the 3 provinces from helping the stronghold. Yang Fan, the Yao State Governor Zhang Jianji, and many other officials of the imperial court had already written to the imperial court to impeach him. Sun Qi and Meng Zhizhu had already sent messengers to Luoyang to apologize to the Son of Heaven and explain the reason for their rebellion. Sun Qi and Meng Zhizhu had already proposed the terms of the peace talks. They had to hand over Huang Jingrong's head. Otherwise, there would be no room for discussion. Each and every incident was like a bolt of lightning striking Huang Jingrong's heart, striking him to the point that he lost his wits. He tightly grabbed onto a pillar in the hall, like he was grabbing onto a life-saving straw. He stubbornly supported himself and did not allow his body to go limp. He placed his last shred of hope on Wen Hao and Yun Xian. However, the following conversation made him even more frightened. Impossible! How could I do this? Inviting all the chieftains of Yao State to publicly apologize to Sun Qi and Meng Zhizhu is fine. It would only be a loss of prestige. Since the plan to replace them has failed, we brothers in hardship cannot become the largest chieftains of Yao State and cannot become the military governor and provincial governor. There is no harm in lowering our heads. However, how could we offer up Huang Jingrong's head? If we kill Huang Jingrong and hand over his head, we will be going back on our word and selling out our friends in order to survive. What we will lose is no longer face, but the hearts of the people. From now on, we can no longer hope for a tribe to be willing to ally with us. We will be alone in Yao State. Wen Hao's face was ashen and twisted to a frightening degree. Brother Yin, you are a smart person. Could it be that you cannot see how sinister Sun Qi's move is? If we do this, we will no longer have a place in Yao State.